The gun came out fast. Not fast enough. Before Preston Dorr, head of security for one of Denver's most powerful corporations, could even register what was happening, the greasy mechanic everyone had been laughing at. All afternoon crossed 15 feet of concrete like he'd done it 1,000 times before. One motion, clean, precise, brutal in its efficiency. The attacker's wrist snapped back. The weapon disappeared from his hand. And 37-year-old Cole Hargrove, father of one, fixer of engines, a man whose gray work jacket still had someone else's oil on the sleeve, pressed the man face down onto the garage floor without a single wasted movement. The whole thing took 4 seconds. Preston stood frozen. So did every executive who'd spent the last hour treating the mechanic like furniture. Nobody was laughing anymore. So, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you already know we don't waste your time with ordinary stories. This one is different. This one is going to stay with you. So before we go any further, hit that subscribe button right now, because the next story we have lined up after this one is even more intense, and you don't want to miss it. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from tonight? I read every single one. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened in that garage, you need to understand the man nobody saw coming. The thing about underground parking garages is that they have their own particular kind of silence, not the quiet of empty spaces or peaceful rooms, something heavier than that. The sound gets absorbed by concrete and steel and the accumulated exhaust of 1,000 vehicles, and what's left is a low, pressurized hush that sits just below the level of hearing. Cole Hargrove had worked in this garage for 2 years, and he'd stopped noticing it a long time ago. He noticed most things, just not that. It was a Tuesday in late October when everything changed, though it didn't feel like a Tuesday that was going to be remembered. It felt like every other afternoon down in sub-level 2 of the Blackwood corporate tower, gray light filtering through the ventilation slats near the ceiling, the distant rumble of the city somewhere above, the smell of motor oil and concrete dust that had worked its way permanently into Cole's sinuses sometime during his first month on the job. I was underneath a 2022 BMW 7 Series that belonged to a hedge fund manager on the 14th floor, replacing a damaged brake caliper, when he heard the convoy pull in. He didn't look up immediately. Convoys came through occasionally, board members, visiting executives, the kind of people who traveled with security details even in cities like Denver, where the threat level didn't technically justify it. Cole finished tightening the caliper bolt before he slid out from under the car on his creeper board and sat up. 3 vehicles. Black. New model Escalades, which told him something. Not armored Suburbans, which told him something else. Corporate security, not government. The lead and trail vehicles were standard, but the middle one, a modified Escalade with slightly thicker door panels, and what Cole clocked immediately as ballistic glass. That one had been upgraded by someone who knew what they were doing, even if whoever prepped the convoy today clearly hadn't checked under the hood recently. He didn't know that yet. That came later. What he noticed first was the woman who stepped out of the middle vehicle. She was 30, maybe 31, in a charcoal blazer that had probably cost more than Cole's monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that looked deliberate rather than hurried, and she moved through the garage with the specific kind of focused urgency that Cole recognized from people who were perpetually late, not because they were disorganized, but because they simply scheduled more things than time allowed. She was on her phone before she'd fully cleared the vehicle door, and she was talking in the clipped economical sentences of someone who had long since stopped bothering to soften professional communication. Tell Marcus the terms aren't negotiable on the IP clause. If Harrington's team wants to revisit revenue sharing, we can do that, but they're not getting the licensing cap removed. I'll be up in 10 minutes. She ended the call without saying goodbye. Cole noticed that too. The security detail arranged itself around her with practiced efficiency, 2 men flanking her toward the elevator bank, 2 more staying with the vehicles, and 1 man hanging slightly back who carried himself with the particular swagger of someone who ran the whole operation. I was broad-shouldered and thick through the neck, maybe 45, with a military-style haircut that had grown out just enough to suggest he'd been out of uniform for several years. His eyes moved around the garage in quick sweeps that looked professional until you watched long enough to realize he was going through the motions rather than actually seeing anything. Cole went back to the BMW. He heard the conversation in fragments over the next several minutes. The woman making additional calls, a subordinate briefing her on revised presentation materials, someone from an upper floor apparently coming down to walk her through last-minute agenda changes. Her name filtered through eventually. Ms. Blackwood. A couple of the security team called her that. One of her own staff members called her Vivian before catching himself and straightening up. Cole filed it all away and kept working. He was moving to his next job, a routine oil change on a company fleet vehicle 2 rows over, when he passed close to the armored Escalade and slowed down without quite meaning to. Something was off. He couldn't have said exactly what triggered it. Some combination of very small things, the way the vehicle sat slightly uneven on its suspension, a faint smell that didn't belong, some signal his eyes had processed before his brain caught up. He stopped, set down his toolbox, and looked at the Escalade more carefully. The driver's side window came down. A young guy, mid-20s, in a dark security polo. "Something you need?" "Just doing my checks," Cole said, which was vague enough to be technically true since he was responsible for flagging mechanical issues on vehicles using the garage. "Mind if I take a quick look at the engine bay?" The driver frowned but didn't have a specific reason to say no. He popped the hood. Cole opened it and looked for about 45 seconds before he found it. The ignition control module had been accessed. Someone had gone into the wiring harness behind it and made 2 small cuts, not enough to prevent the vehicle from starting immediately, but enough to cause a cascade failure after the engine had been running for a few minutes and the system cycled through its startup diagnostics. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. A routine pre-drive check wouldn't catch it. The vehicle would start fine. It would make it out of the garage, down the block, maybe 2 blocks, and then it would die in traffic. Cole stood very still for a moment. "Problem?" the driver asked. "Yeah," Cole said. "There's a problem." He closed the hood and picked up his toolbox. He needed to find the security chief. The man with the swagger, Preston Dorr, Cole learned his name later, was standing near the elevator bank with 2 of his team members, going over something on a tablet. Cole approached him directly. He'd learned a long time ago that there was no useful version of circling around a problem. "Excuse me." Preston looked up with the specific expression of a man who has interrupted what he considers important work to address something he's already decided doesn't matter. "Yeah?" "The armored vehicle. Someone's tampered with the ignition system. She shouldn't leave in that car." A pause. Preston looked at Cole, at the gray work jacket, at the oil-stained hands, at the toolbox. Something shifted in his expression that wasn't quite a smile. "She." He repeated the word back with a slight emphasis that made clear he'd noticed Cole didn't know Vivian Blackwood's name. "You fix cars." "I do," Cole said. "Then fix her car." Preston turned back to the tablet. "And let me handle security." One of the other team members, a younger guy trying to mirror his boss's tone, made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but wanted to be. Cole looked at him briefly, then back at Preston. "I'm not telling you there's a security threat," Cole said, keeping his voice level. "I'm telling you the vehicle has been mechanically compromised. That's my area. You should know about it." Preston didn't look up from the tablet this time. "Noted. Go fix it." Cole stood there for another second, then picked up his toolbox and walked back toward the Escalade. His jaw was tight. He'd been dismissed before, many times, in many contexts, by people who would have been horrified to know who they were talking to. He'd stopped letting it bother him in any lasting way. But the dismissal wasn't the problem right now. The problem was that the ignition tamper was precise and deliberate, which meant it wasn't a random act of vandalism. And precise, deliberate sabotage meant someone had a specific goal in mind that went beyond a broken-down vehicle. He crouched down beside the Escalade as if he were beginning repairs, and let his eyes work the garage systematically. Old habit. He'd trained himself out of looking at things directly when he needed to actually see them. The peripheral vision processed movement and anomaly more efficiently, less likely to fixate on the expected and miss the unexpected. He found 2 things in the first 3 minutes. The first was the security camera covering Vivian Blackwood's designated parking area. It was mounted at the corner of a concrete pillar about 20 feet up, and it had been rotated approximately 30 degrees from its standard position. Not broken, not disabled, just quietly pointed at a blank stretch of wall instead of the area it was supposed to cover. Done carefully enough that you'd have to be specifically looking for it to notice. The second thing took him another 5 minutes, and he found it only because he'd started thinking about the tamper in terms of intent rather than mechanics. If you disable a vehicle mid-route, you strand someone in a predictable location. If you want to know exactly where that location will be, you need to track the vehicle. He got flat on his back and ran his hands along the Escalade's undercarriage until his fingers found the magnetic case bolted behind the rear differential. GPS tracker. Not factory. Aftermarket. High-end. The kind that transmitted in encrypted bursts every 30 seconds to minimize detection by standard sweeping equipment. Cole lay under the vehicle for a moment without moving. Someone had been watching Vivian Blackwood's movements long enough to know her vehicle, her garage, her parking location. They'd gotten access to this garage, which had a keycard system and was supposed to be secured, planted a tracker, disabled the security camera, and sabotaged the ignition. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned. He started to slide out from under the vehicle to go back to Preston, and that was when the lights went out. Not gradually, not flickering. All at once, every overhead fixture in sublevel 2 cutting to black simultaneously, followed 2 seconds later by the emergency lighting cycling on, low-intensity red strips along the floor near the exits and elevator banks, casting the garage in the kind of dim crimson light that made everything look slightly unreal. Cole was already on his feet. He heard Vivian's voice from across the garage, calm but sharp. "What's happening?" And Preston's voice responding, professional and controlled, but with an edge underneath it. "Stay close. Everyone, stay close." And then Cole saw the elevator doors open. 2 men stepped out. They weren't security. Cole knew that before he'd consciously processed why. The way they moved into the space was wrong. Security personnel enter an unfamiliar environment cautiously, establishing sight lines, reading the room. These 2 moved like they already knew exactly where they were going. One of them, taller, wearing a jacket that was a size too large in the shoulders in a way that suggested something beneath it, started toward the cluster of people near the elevator bank at an angle that looked casual and wasn't. The second man went the other direction. Cole watched the second man for exactly 3 seconds and understood the geometry of it. One attacker would create a disturbance at the front, noise, confusion, something to pull attention forward. The second would come from the left flank, through the row of parked vehicles, approaching from behind the group while everyone's eyes were pulled the wrong direction. Preston had 2 guys moving to intercept the first man. Standard response. Obvious response. The kind of response that made complete sense against a single threat and would leave Vivian completely exposed to the second one. Cole dropped his wrench. He moved through the red-lit garage at an angle, using the parked cars as cover, keeping his profile low. He wasn't running. Running made noise, announced position, burned energy he might need. He was moving the way he'd moved through 100 other dark spaces in his previous life. The way that had become so deeply encoded in his nervous system that 37-year-old mechanic Cole Hargrove did it as naturally as breathing, even after all these years. He came around the nose of a parked sedan and saw the second attacker clearly, 10 feet away, now 8, moving between vehicles with his right hand inside his jacket. Cole made a decision in less than a second. "Vivian, down!" he shouted, and then he was already moving toward the attacker rather than away from him. The man's hand came out of the jacket. Cole was already there. What happened next lasted approximately 4 seconds, and none of the executives standing near the elevator bank processed it in real time. They would reconstruct it later, in pieces, the way you reconstruct something that moved too fast to follow. What they knew, when it was over, was that the mechanic had crossed the distance, redirected the attacker's arm with a specific grip that stripped the weapon from his hand, and taken the man down to the concrete with a controlled technique that looked almost economical in its violence. Nothing wasted, nothing excessive, just enough force applied to exactly the right places to end the threat without ending the man. Preston had the first attacker restrained by then, his 2 team members sitting on him while he called it in on his radio. Cole stood up from the second attacker, the retrieved weapon held carefully at his side in a 2-fingered grip so no one would mistake his intentions. He was breathing harder than he'd like to admit. 2 years of engine work hadn't kept him at SEAL standards, and he'd feel this tomorrow. But his hands were steady. The garage was quiet. Vivian Blackwood was crouched behind the front quarter panel of her armored Escalade, where she'd dropped when Cole shouted. Now she slowly straightened up. Her blazer was dusty from the concrete floor. Her hair had come loose from its careful arrangement on one side. She looked at Cole across the dim, red-lit space with an expression he couldn't quite read. Cole looked back at her. He set the weapon down carefully on the hood of the nearest car and stepped back from it, putting distance between himself and it, so the police response, when it came, would have a clear picture. Then he turned and did a systematic scan of the garage because old habits don't break. They just go quiet for a while, and right now they were all the way awake. He didn't see anyone else. Behind him, one of the executives, some vice president type in an expensive suit, who'd been smirking at Cole earlier while Preston made his "he fixes cars" comment, was on the phone, voice shaking slightly, telling someone to call the police. Another had his back pressed against the wall near the elevator and was staring at Cole like he was trying to reconcile two completely different images that didn't fit inside the same frame. Preston Dorr stood in the middle of it all with his radio in one hand and his face doing something complicated. Cole walked back toward his toolbox. He picked it up, checked that everything was where it belonged, he was precise about his tools, and set it back down beside the BMW he'd been working on earlier. His hands were still stained with grease from this afternoon's brake job. Maddie had a spelling test tomorrow. He'd promised to run her through the words one more time tonight after dinner. He'd gotten distracted by the brake caliper and hadn't made it to the grocery store yet, which meant dinner was going to be whatever was left in the refrigerator, and he was almost certain all that was left in the refrigerator was leftover pasta from Sunday and approximately one serving of orange juice. He stood beside his toolbox in the red-tinged light and waited for the police to arrive because there was nothing else to do right now, and Cole Hargrove had become very practiced at doing exactly what was necessary and nothing more. Somewhere across the garage, Preston Dorr was looking at him. Cole didn't look back. The sirens started somewhere above them, filtering down through the ventilation slats, getting closer. The first police unit arrived at sub-level 2 11 minutes after the emergency lighting kicked on, which felt both very fast and very slow depending on which side of the situation you'd been standing on. By the time the officers came through the stairwell door with their weapons drawn and their flashlights cutting white beams through the red-tinged garage, Cole had already moved the retrieved weapon to the top of a concrete pillar where it was clearly visible and clearly separated from any person, and had positioned himself near his toolbox with his hands open at his sides. He'd learned a long time ago that the moment right after a confrontation was often more dangerous than the confrontation itself, because adrenaline made people with badges and guns process information poorly, and a large man standing over two restrained individuals in a dim parking garage needed to make his intentions absolutely unambiguous inside the first 3 seconds. "Mechanic," he said, clearly, before any of the officers spoke. "I work here. The weapon on the pillar belongs to one of the two men on the ground. I took it off him. Preston Dorr is head of security for the building. He can confirm." Preston, to his credit, confirmed immediately and loudly. It still took another 20 minutes before anyone was comfortable enough to holster their weapons, during which time Cole sat on the bumper of the BMW he'd been working on and answered questions from a patrol officer named Reyes, who wrote everything down in a small notebook with a pen that kept running dry. Reyes would click the pen 3 or 4 times, wait for it to catch, write another line, and repeat the cycle. Cole found it oddly grounding. The domestic frustration of a malfunctioning pen. Vivian Blackwood was on the other side of the garage doing her own version of this, surrounded by 2 detectives and one of her own legal team members who had apparently materialized from somewhere upstairs within minutes of the first police call. She was answering questions in that same clipped, economical way she'd been talking on the phone when she stepped out of the vehicle 2 hours ago, except that her hair was still partially loose and there was a scuff on the left knee of her dress pants from when she dropped to the concrete, and these small imperfections gave her a different quality than she'd had when she first arrived. Less like a photograph of a person, more like the actual person. Cole wasn't watching her specifically. He was watching everything, which was different. The 2 attackers had been cuffed and separated. Both were conscious. The one Cole had taken down was holding his wrist at an angle that suggested it wasn't completely undamaged, and he'd said nothing beyond his name when the officers processed him, which told Cole something about his training. Not random hired muscle. Someone had put real thought into who they sent. That thought sat in Cole's chest like a weight that hadn't finished falling yet. Reyes clicked his pen for the 6th time. "And the tracker you mentioned, you said you found it before the lights went out?" "Correct. Behind the rear differential. Magnetic mount, aftermarket hardware. I left it in place. Didn't want to compromise anything." Cole paused. You'll want someone to check the security camera on pillar 7. Northeast corner. It's been rotated away from the coverage zone it's supposed to monitor. That's not accidental. Reyes wrote it down. You have a lot of familiarity with security setups for a mechanic. I read, Cole said, which wasn't technically a lie. Reyes looked at him for a moment, pen hovering. He was maybe 28, with the kind of careful eyes that suggested he'd be good at this job in another decade or so. Mr. Hargrove, then I ask, what you did with that guy? Where that came from? I handled a situation, Cole said. The way you handled it, I need to make a phone call, Cole said. My daughter's with a neighbor. I need to let them know I'm going to be late. Reyes studied him for another second, then nodded slowly and stepped back. Cole pulled out his phone, a 4-year-old model with a cracked lower corner of the screen that he kept meaning to replace, and called Mrs. Paulson, who lived 2 floors below him in their apartment building and watched Maddie on the rare occasions Cole got held up at work. She answered on the second ring. Cole? Everything okay? There was an incident at work. I'm going to be another hour or 2, maybe more. Is Maddie all right? She's fine. She ate her dinner. Well, most of it. She did that thing where she ate around the green parts, and now she's doing her spelling words. A pause. An incident. Are you all right? I'm fine. Cole. I'm genuinely fine, Mrs. Paulson. I'll explain when I get home. He heard Maddie's voice in the background, asking something, and Mrs. Paulson's muffled response covering the phone. Then, she wants to know if you're going to be there for the spelling practice. Cole looked at the garage around him. The red emergency lighting, the 2 officers guarding the restrained men, the CSI tech who'd just arrived and was now crouched beneath the Escalade retrieving the tracker. Vivian Blackwood still talking to the detectives across the concrete expanse. Tell her I'll try, he said, and if I can't make it tonight, we'll do a double session tomorrow. He hung up and pocketed the phone. When he looked up, Preston Dorr was standing about 8 feet away. They looked at each other. Preston had the particular stillness of a man who was recalibrating something internal and finding the process uncomfortable. He was holding his radio in one hand, not using it, and his jaw was set in a way that suggested the thing he wanted to say and the thing he was going to say weren't exactly the same. I misjudged the situation, Preston said finally. Yes, Cole said. I misjudged you. Cole didn't answer that one. There wasn't a response that didn't make the whole thing worse. Preston exhaled. It was a short, controlled sound, the kind that carries a lot of weight in a small package. The camera on pillar 7. You spotted that before any of my team did. I was looking at the vehicle. My team swept the garage 2 hours before you arrived on shift. Someone accessed this garage between your sweep and when the convoy arrived, Cole said, which means they either had credentials or they had someone who did. You're going to want to pull the access logs and cross-reference them with everyone who had legitimate reason to be down here today. Preston stared at him. That's exactly right. He said it the way a person says something when they're angry at themselves for not having said it first. He lifted his radio, clicked it, and started issuing instructions. Cole sat back down on the BMW bumper. Over the next 40 minutes, the garage filled up incrementally. A second CSI unit, a supervisor from the Denver Police Department, and eventually 2 men in plainclothes who showed their credentials to the officers at the stairwell door and were given immediate access. They identified themselves to the room as detectives from the Financial Crimes Division, which was unusual enough that it pulled Cole's attention fully back to the situation. Financial crimes. Not violent crimes. Not organized crime. Financial crimes, arriving at a scene that had physically looked like an attempted assault or kidnapping, which meant someone already knew something about the why of this evening that Cole didn't. One of the financial crimes detectives, a woman named Chen, compact and precise in her movements, made a slow circuit of the garage before she spoke to anyone. She looked at the tracker, looked at the camera on pillar 7, looked at the 2 restrained men, and then she looked at Cole for a slightly longer interval than she looked at anything else. Then she went to speak with the patrol officers and with Preston. Cole watched her work. It was another 20 minutes before anyone thought to tell Vivian Blackwood that her merger meeting, the one she'd been racing to reach when her driver pulled into this garage 2.5 hours ago, was not going to happen tonight. He watched her receive that information from a young woman on her staff who delivered it with the expression of someone diffusing an explosive. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said something Cole couldn't hear from this distance, and the young woman nodded and walked away. And Vivian turned back to the detective she'd been speaking with and continued answering questions without any visible pause in composure. But Cole had watched her face in the fraction of a second between receiving the news and deciding how to respond to it, and he'd seen something flicker through. Not panic, not frustration exactly, but something sharper and more private, like a door opening and closing very quickly. He'd seen that expression before. He'd worn it himself enough times to recognize it. The meeting wasn't just a meeting. There was something riding on it that went beyond the normal weight of professional stakes. He'd find out later how right he was. Detective Chen came to speak with Cole around the time the emergency lighting finally cycled off and the regular overhead fluorescence came back on, which changed the character of the whole scene. Everything looked flatter and more ordinary in white light, the kind of light that makes drama look slightly ridiculous, which Cole had always thought was part of why interrogation rooms were lit the way they were. Chen sat down on a plastic equipment case that a tech had left nearby and opened a small notebook. Not the spiral kind Reyes used, a proper hardbound thing, the kind that suggested she'd been doing this long enough to have preferences. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, "I want to ask you about the ignition system." "Okay." "You found the tamper before the vehicle attempted to start." "Correct." "Can you walk me through how you identified it?" Cole walked her through it, the vehicle sitting slightly wrong on its suspension, the smell, the visual on the wiring harness, the specific cuts in the ignition control module. Chen listened without interrupting, which was a skill. When he finished, she looked at her notebook for a moment. "The cuts you're describing," she said, "would cause a failure after the vehicle had been running for approximately how long? 2 to 3 minutes? Maybe 4? Enough time to clear the garage and get into traffic. So whoever planned this wanted the vehicle to be mobile before it failed." "They wanted her in a specific location," Cole said. "The tracker would tell them where the vehicle died. If you've already cleared the route, you know exactly where that's going to be." Chen looked at him with the particular attention of someone who is hearing something that fits with other things they already know. "And the location where the failure would most likely have occurred. Do you know this area?" "I drive the route sometimes when I'm moving vehicles for the building. There's a stretch on Wazi Street, 2 blocks from the tower, where the road narrows because of the construction on the east side. 1 lane in each direction. If the vehicle died there, it would be very difficult to maneuver around," Chen finished. "And the surrounding buildings have loading bay access on both sides." Cole looked at her. "You've already been thinking about the location." "We've been thinking about Ms. Blackwood for a while," Chen said carefully. "For unrelated reasons that are now looking somewhat related." She paused. "What I'm going to tell you is preliminary and shouldn't leave this conversation. Are we understood?" "Yes. There's been an ongoing financial investigation involving Blackwood Enterprises, specifically involving irregularities in vendor payments that have been traced through a series of shell companies. The investigation is close to a resolution." She stopped. "The merger meeting that Ms. Blackwood was trying to reach tonight, that merger would have triggered a mandatory independent audit of the company's full vendor network." Cole was quiet for a moment. "And if someone inside the company was running something through those vendor accounts, they would have had very strong motivation to prevent that audit from ever happening," Chen said. Cole sat with that for a moment. The tracker, the camera, the carefully timed ignition failure, the 2 men who moved through the garage like they'd rehearsed it. None of it had been meant to strand Vivian Blackwood in traffic for the inconvenience of it. It had been meant to put her somewhere predictable, controlled, accessible, and away from her security detail, who would stay with the vehicle while someone else handled the problem a block away. "She would have gotten out of the car to see what happened," Cole said, thinking it through out loud. "Driver would have called it in. Preston's team would have been managing the logistics of a broken-down armored vehicle in a construction zone. She'd have been exposed." "For approximately 4 to 6 minutes," Chen said, "before anyone got a clear picture of what was actually happening." That was a long time. Cole knew exactly how long that was. He looked across the garage at Vivian Blackwood, who was now standing with her arms crossed and her back to the wall, talking quietly with one of her attorneys. She'd been composed the entire evening. No tears, no visible shaking, none of the delayed shock responses Cole had watched other people move through after violent incidents. But there was something careful in the way she was holding herself right now, the slightly too controlled posture of someone who's running on pure discipline and would deal with the rest of it later, in private. Cole wondered how long she'd been doing that, running on discipline and dealing with everything else later. He recognized that particular posture from the inside. "Mr. Hargrove?" Chen had her pen poised. "I need to ask you a direct question, and I need a straight answer." "Go ahead." "Your response to the attacker tonight, the technique you used to disarm him, that's not something most people have." Cole didn't say anything. "I'm going to run your background anyway," Chen said, not unkindly. "That's just procedure. It would save some time if you could tell me who you used to be before you started fixing cars." A long pause. Cole looked at the concrete floor, then back at her. "I was in the Navy," he said. Chen waited. "Special operations," Cole added, in a tone that made clear that was as specific as he was going to get tonight. Chen wrote something in her notebook. She didn't push further, which confirmed Cole's earlier read of her as someone who understood when she'd gotten what she needed. "One more question. The merger meeting that was supposed to happen tonight. We're going to be asking Ms. Blackwood to delay it until we've completed a more thorough investigation. Is there anything in what you observed tonight that suggests the threat has been fully neutralized?" Cole thought about the two men on the ground. He thought about the level of planning that had gone into the evening, the access credentials, the tracker, the camera, the timed ignition failure, the way the two attackers had moved, coordinated without communication, like they'd worked together before. "The men you have in custody," he said, "are not the person who designed this." Chen's pen stopped moving. "No," she said. "They're not." "So the threat has not been fully neutralized," Cole said. "No." Chen nodded slowly, closing her notebook. "That's what I needed to hear." She stood up, tucked the notebook into her jacket pocket. "Thank you, Mr. Hargrove. We'll probably have more questions in the next few days. Don't leave the state." "I'm not going anywhere," Cole said. "I live here." She almost smiled at that, which was the closest thing to warmth she'd displayed in the entire conversation. And then she walked away to find the next person she needed to speak with. Cole stayed where he was for a little while. The garage was humming with activity now. Multiple units, multiple agencies. The organized chaos of a crime scene that was still being fully understood by the people processing it. Someone had propped the stairwell door open, and there was fresh October air filtering down, cold and thin at altitude, carrying the smell of the city in the evening. It cut through the motor oil and concrete smell in a way that was almost pleasant. He was going to miss the spelling practice. He pulled out his phone and sent Mrs. Paulson a text. "Going to be a couple more hours. I'll grab something for Maddie's lunch tomorrow when I get back. Sorry for the inconvenience." "See," Mrs. Paulson replied almost immediately. "She's already asleep. Don't rush. Be safe." Cole looked at that last part for a moment. Be safe. He hadn't thought about his own safety once in the past 2 hours, which was probably not the most psychologically healthy thing to recognize about yourself, but was also simply true. Old wiring was old wiring. "Mr. Hargrove." He looked up. Vivian Blackwood was standing 5 feet away. Her attorney was hovering about 15 feet behind her, watching with visible anxiety, and one of Preston's team was nearby as well, which meant she hadn't gone anywhere without a shadow all evening and wasn't about to now. But she'd clearly made a deliberate choice to walk over here, which required some small effort against the current of the evening. Cole stood up from the bumper. They were closer to the same height than he'd expected. She was maybe 5'7", 5'8". Her eyes were dark brown, direct, and she looked at him the way she'd been looking at the detectives all evening, measuring, processing, deciding what to do with what she found. "I want to say thank you," she said. "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to." There was a slight edge in that, not hostile, more like she was accustomed to people misunderstanding directness for obligation. "I'm saying it because it's true. You warned my security team before any of this happened. They didn't listen." Preston was doing his job, Cole said. He didn't have the same information I had. Vivian looked at him steadily. "You're being more generous to him than he was to you." "He's a solid security man," Cole said. "He'll do better next time." Something shifted in her expression. Not softening exactly, more like a slight adjustment, the way a person looks when they encounter something that doesn't fit the category they put it in. She'd filed him somewhere in the last 2 hours, and this response didn't quite fit the file. "They told me about the tracker," she said, "and the camera, and the way the ignition was modified. I figured they would." That's a lot of things to notice, she said. In a parking garage, while you were doing brake work. Cole didn't respond to that directly. Detective Chen is going to recommend you delay the merger meeting. I know, she already told me. Vivian glanced away briefly, at nothing in particular, the concrete wall, the overhead lights, some middle distance. There's a workforce protection clause in the merger agreement that only holds if the deal closes before the end of the quarter. If we miss that window, she stopped. Sorry, that's not your concern. The employees, Cole said. She looked back at him. The clause protects employees, he said. That's why the window matters. A pause. 243 people in the acquired company's operations division, she said. If the deal closes after the quarter ends, the acquiring terms revert and the standard redundancy provisions kick in. She said it plainly, without editorializing, the way someone states a fact they've been carrying around long enough that the weight of it has become familiar. Cole looked at her. She'd spent the last 2 hours being questioned by police, processed through a traumatic incident that by any reasonable metric would have earned her a quiet room and a drink and some privacy. And what she was thinking about was 243 people in an operations division. The deal will close, Cole said. It wasn't a promise. He had no basis for a promise. It was just something that felt true to say. Vivian looked at him with an expression he couldn't completely decode. You said that with a lot of confidence for someone who doesn't know anything about merger law. I said it with confidence because you strike me as someone who doesn't lose things she decides to hold on to, Cole said. She was quiet for a moment. Around them, the garage continued its organized hum, radio calls, evidence bags, the creak of equipment cases. Preston was on the far side talking to the DPD supervisor, his back straight and his expression controlled. Who are you? Vivian asked finally. Not rhetorically. An actual question asked plainly. Cole Hargrove, he said. I fix cars. That's not what I mean. I know, Cole said, but that's the honest answer. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable, and he held it back because he wasn't the kind of person who looked away from things. And then she gave a slight nod. Not agreement, more like acknowledgement of something she'd decided to accept for now, and said, You have a daughter. Cole's attention sharpened slightly. How do you know that? You mentioned a neighbor watching her when you were on the phone. She said it simply, without apology. I notice things. So do I, Cole said. Something moved across her face that might have been the beginning of a smile, though it didn't fully complete. She's waiting for you. She's asleep by now. But she was waiting, Vivian said. Cole didn't answer that because she was right, and some things don't need more said about them. Vivian straightened slightly. I'm going to be late as well. Or actually, I'm going to be very early. I'll be in the office by 6 tomorrow morning sorting out this merger mess, and that requires getting at least 3 hours of sleep first, which means I need to leave. She looked at him with that same direct measuring quality. Mr. Hargrove, thank you. I mean that. Cole, he said. A brief pause. Cole. She turned and walked back toward her attorney and her security escort, and Cole watched her go with the quiet attentiveness he brought to everything, and then he turned back to his toolbox and began to pack it up properly, because the work of the evening was done and the night shift crew would be here in an hour, and he didn't leave things undone. Somewhere in a room that Cole wouldn't know about until 3 days later, a man named Malcolm Vane, senior executive at Blackwood Enterprises, 12-year employee, a face Cole had seen exactly once on a company directory posted in the building lobby, sat in front of a secure laptop and read the text message that told him both his contractors had been detained and the target had not been reached. Malcolm Vane was 51 years old, silver-haired, and had spent the better part of 4 years carefully moving money through a series of vendor accounts that nobody was supposed to be smart enough or patient enough to trace. He had a house in Cherry Creek, and a vacation property in Sedona, and a retirement account in a Cayman structure that should have been ironclad. The merger was supposed to have been handled before it ever reached the signing stage. The audit that would follow the merger was the specific thing that would unravel all of it, and he'd spent 3 months arranging an alternative solution. The alternative solution was currently in custody. Malcolm sat with the text message for a long moment, then deleted it, and closed the laptop and poured 2 fingers of scotch that he did not drink. He sat with the glass in his hand and thought about what came next. He was not a man who panicked easily. That was, in fact, the quality that had made him such a successful thief for so long, the ability to remain calm and think in orderly progressions even when the situation deteriorated. There were other options. Not as clean, not as fast, but other options existed for people who kept thinking clearly. He put the scotch down untouched. He opened a second phone, a burner, not linked to anything that touched his real life, and began composing a new message. In sub-level 2 of the Blackwood corporate tower, Cole Hargrove closed his toolbox latches and lifted it by the handle and walked toward the employee exit, past the crime scene tape and the officers and the evidence technicians, past the armored Escalade with its hood still raised and its wiring harness still showing the two small deliberate cuts, past the spot on the concrete where he'd taken down the second attacker and changed, without planning to, the entire remainder of the evening. The cold air hit him when he pushed through the door to the parking level stairwell. He stood in it for a second, letting it work on him, the chill, the altitude, the smell of the city at 9:15 on a Tuesday in October. His shoulder was going to ache tomorrow. He could already feel the beginning of it, the deep muscle complaint of a body that was 37 instead of 26 and had been asked without warning to do something it hadn't done in years. He started up the stairs. By the time he reached street level, he'd decided three things. He would check the garage access logs himself in the morning, not because it was his job, but because he'd been the one down there and he'd seen how the tamper was done, and that kind of knowledge was sometimes more useful than a badge. He would call Detective Chen with whatever he found, and he would stop at the 24-hour pharmacy on Larimer on his way home and get something for the shoulder, because the spelling practice might be canceled tonight, but there were 37 more on Maddie's third-grade list, and he intended to be functional for all of them. The night shift foot traffic on the sidewalk moved around him. Couples, food delivery workers, a guy walking three dogs who were all trying to go in different directions. Denver at night in October, ordinary and indifferent to everything that had happened 30 feet underground. Cole walked home through it, his toolbox in one hand and his phone in the other, already thinking about tomorrow. He didn't know yet that tomorrow was going to be considerably more complicated than tonight. Cole's shoulder felt exactly as bad as he'd predicted, which was almost satisfying in the way that confirmed predictions sometimes are. He'd taken something for it the night before and slept 4 hours, which was more than he'd expected and less than he needed. And by 6:15 Wednesday morning, he was already in the building's security office on sub-level 1, standing behind a junior facilities manager named Torres, who was pulling up the garage access logs from the previous day because Cole had asked him to, and Cole had a way of asking for things that made people want to cooperate without quite knowing why. The logs showed 11 access events in sub-level 2 between Preston's security sweep at 2:30 in the afternoon and the convoy's arrival at 4:47. 7 of them were routine: building maintenance, a delivery driver, 2 parking attendants completing their shift changeover. 3 were flagged as vendor credentials, which was normal. 1 was not normal. At 3:51, a credential registered to a cleaning services company called Meridian Building Solutions had accessed sub-level 2 through the secondary service entrance. The credential was valid, properly registered, properly formatted, showing no flags in the system. The access event lasted 22 minutes. Meridian Building Solutions had a contract with the tower for overnight cleaning of common areas, and had never previously sent a crew during afternoon hours. "Didn't you pull the vendor file for Meridian?" Cole asked. Torres pulled it. The company had been added to the building's approved vendor list 14 months ago, under the authorization signature of the building operations manager, a man named Gerald Fitch, who'd retired 8 months ago, and whose replacement had never conducted a vendor audit of any kind because vendor audits were not technically required until contract renewal, and the Meridian contract didn't renew for another 4 months. Cole looked at the file. Meridian Building Solutions had a registered address in Commerce City, a state business license that was 18 months old, and a single point of contact, a man named D. Rourke, listed as operations manager, with a phone number that Cole suspected would ring somewhere interesting or not at all. He wrote down everything and called Detective Chen at 6:43. She answered on the second ring, which told him she was already working. He gave her what he had: the credential, the timestamp, the Meridian file, the Fitch connection. She listened without interrupting, the same way she'd listened the night before, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The Meridian credential," she said. "The cleaning company." "Yes. We ran a preliminary sweep of all vendor accesses last night. That one came up clean in the initial filter because the credential was legitimate." It's legitimate, Cole said. That's the point. Someone set it up a year ago. They weren't improvising this, they were building toward it. Another pause. Mr. Hargrove, how early in the morning do you usually start your shift? 7. I'm going to need you to not touch anything else in that access log until my team gets there. I haven't touched anything, Cole said. I had Torres pull it. I just looked. Chen exhaled, a short sound that carried something between frustration and reluctant appreciation. I'll have someone there within the hour. Don't talk to anyone else about the Meridian entry specifically. Understood. He hung up, thanked Torres, and went down to sub-level 2 to start his shift, because the vehicles in this garage didn't care about financial crimes investigations, and a fleet manager on the 9th floor had been waiting 3 days for a transmission diagnostic that was already overdue. He was 40 minutes into the diagnostic when he heard the elevator. Not the elevator itself, the specific sequence of it, the way it opened, and then the footsteps that followed, and the particular rhythm of more than one person moving with deliberate purpose. Cole didn't look up immediately. He tracked the sound underneath the BMW's hood while his hands continued their work, and he identified 4 individuals before any of them spoke. Mr. Hargrove. He straightened up and turned. Detective Chen was there, and beside her was a man Cole hadn't seen before. Older, maybe 55, in a suit that was better than a detective's budget generally allowed, with the specific bearing of someone who had authority that didn't require a badge to project. Behind them were 2 others in plainclothes who positioned themselves near the exits without being told to. Detective, Cole said. This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Marsh, Chen said. He's been overseeing the financial investigation connected to Blackwood Enterprises. Marsh extended his hand. His grip was firm and dry. Mr. Hargrove, I've been briefed on last night's events and on your background. I have some questions, but first I want to give you some information, because I think you've earned the right to understand the full picture. Cole wiped his hands on a shop rag and waited. Marsh looked at the garage around them with the expression of a man who was choosing to be somewhere considerably less comfortable than his office because the situation warranted it. The investigation into Malcolm Vane has been active for 14 months. He's a senior vice president of operations at Blackwood Enterprises, and he's been systematically siphoning money through a series of shell vendors, fake companies on the approved vendor list that invoice the company for services never rendered, collect payment, and move the money through layered accounts. We estimate the total at somewhere between $8 and $11 million over 4 years. Cole looked at him. Meridian Building Solutions. Marsh's expression shifted slightly. Among others, yes. Meridian is one of 6 shell companies we've identified. The cleaning company credential that accessed this garage yesterday afternoon was set up specifically to provide a legitimate-looking entry point. Whoever came through that door worked for Vane. Or was Vane, Cole said. We don't believe Vane was physically present, Marsh said. He's careful. That's been the consistent challenge throughout this investigation. He keeps enough distance between himself and the operational elements that direct connection has been difficult to establish. Until now. The 2 men from last night. One of them has started talking, Chen said. Not about everything, but enough. She glanced at Marsh, then back at Cole. He confirmed that the contract for last night came through a cutout, a middleman, but he also provided a phone number that our technical team traced through 4 layers of VoIP routing to a device that made a call from the Cherry Creek neighborhood of Denver at 9:47 last night. Cole was quiet for a moment. Vane lives in Cherry Creek. He does, Marsh said. It's not enough on its own. It's consistent with what we already have, and it moves the needle, but it doesn't close the case. He paused. What we need is the merger. Specifically, we need the audit that follows the merger. The independent auditors have access to financial records that our subpoenas can't reach efficiently without a much longer legal process, records that would make the case against Vane airtight rather than merely compelling. Vivian needs to close the merger, Cole said. Vivian needs to close the merger, and she needs to be alive to do it, Marsh said plainly. Last night's attempt failed. Vane knows that. He's going to be recalibrating, and the question we don't have an answer to yet is how quickly he moves and in what direction. Cole looked at the assistant U.S. attorney. You're telling me this for a reason. I'm telling you this because you live in the same building as the access logs. You've already demonstrated better situational awareness than most of the people I have working this case, and because Vivian Blackwood's security has a gap I need filled. Marsh's tone was matter of fact, not apologetic. Preston Dorr is competent. His team is adequate. But adequate isn't the right standard for the next 2 to 3 weeks while we push this investigation to resolution. You want me to... Cole stopped. I'm not asking you to rejoin anything, Marsh said, apparently reading the specific quality of Cole's hesitation correctly. I'm asking if you'd be willing to consult informally on the physical security assessment for Miss Blackwood's immediate environment. Routes, access points, timing patterns, the kinds of things your background makes you qualified to evaluate, and that I don't have someone better positioned to do right now. Cole looked at the BMW behind him, the diagnostic reader still plugged into the OBD port, the transmission data scrolling on its small screen. I have a job, Cole said. I know you do. I have a daughter. I know that too. A long pause. The garage hummed around them, ventilation, distant traffic, the ordinary sounds of a building going about its morning. Let me think about it, Cole said. Marsh nodded once. That's fair. He handed Cole a card, plain, federal, with a direct number written in pen on the back. Think quickly. They left the way they'd come, and Cole stood with the card in his hand for a moment before he put it in his shirt pocket and turned back to the transmission diagnostic. He called Marsh back at 10:15 and said he'd do the assessment. Not the ongoing security work, just the assessment. 2 days, he said. He'd look at the access points and the routine patterns and write up his findings, and then he was back to being a mechanic. Marsh said that was fine. Cole suspected Marsh already understood that 2 days was not how this was going to go, but appreciated that neither of them said so out loud. He told his supervisor, a long-suffering facilities manager named Bert, who had the energy of a man who had stopped being surprised by anything years ago, that he needed to take 2 personal days for a family matter. Bert looked at him for a moment, then looked at the TV in the break room corner where the previous night's incident at the Blackwood Tower was still running on a local news ticker, then looked back at Cole. 2 days, Bert said. 2 days, Cole confirmed. Don't break anything that costs more than I make in a year, Bert said, and went back to his paperwork. Cole called Mrs. Paulson about Maddie, who was in school until 3 and could do her after-school hours at the Paulson apartment, and Mrs. Paulson said that was no problem, and also that she'd heard something on the news this morning that sounded like it might involve the Blackwood Tower, and was Cole all right, and Cole said he was fine, and Mrs. Paulson said she knew what fine meant when Cole said it, and would he please eat something today, and Cole said he would, and that was the most honest conversation he had that entire week. Vivian Blackwood's office was on this 23rd floor, and it looked the way Cole had expected. Large windows facing west toward the mountains, a glass desk with very little on it, bookshelves that held actual books rather than the decorative kind, and a quality of controlled organization that suggested someone who thought clearly and worked hard and didn't spend a lot of energy on performance. He'd been up here twice before to service the HVAC unit in the adjacent conference room, and both times he'd registered the space without particularly thinking about its occupant. He thought about it now with different eyes. 3 entry points: main door from the reception area, emergency exit on the east wall, and the internal stairwell access that connected the executive floor to the 22nd and 24th. The windows were floor to ceiling and faced a clear sightline from the building across the street, which was a parking structure whose upper levels were publicly accessible. The office was visible from a minimum of 6 angles from that structure, depending on light conditions and the position of the desk. He noted this without immediately saying anything, because Vivian was on a call when he arrived, and her assistant had waved him in with a look of mild bewilderment at whatever category of person Cole represented this morning, standing in the executive reception area in his cleanest non-work clothes, dark jeans, a gray thermal, work boots that he'd actually cleaned for the first time in recent memory. Vivian ended the call and looked up. She registered the different context without making a production of it. "You're the security assessment." "I am today," Cole said. "Marsh called me this morning. He said you'd agreed to consult." She stood from behind the desk and moved toward the window, which was exactly what Cole would have preferred she not do, but he didn't say anything yet. "I want to be clear about something. I don't want to be managed. If you find something that needs to change, tell me directly and tell me why, and I'll make the decision." "Okay," Cole said. Preston was not happy about this arrangement. "I imagine not. I told him that his feelings about it were understandable, and also not my primary concern right now." She glanced at him. "He's better than he was last night. He took apart his own team's sweep procedures this morning and found 3 things he should have caught differently. He's thorough when he's motivated. Good, Cole said, and meant it. He didn't need Preston to be an adversary. He needed him to be better at his job, and apparently humiliation had accomplished what nothing else had. What do you need from me? Vivian asked. Your schedule for the next 2 weeks, Cole said. Every fixed appointment, times, locations, how you travel to and from, your regular routes, where you park when you're not in this building, restaurants, if you have regular ones. He paused. Personal appointments as well, if there are any. Vivian's expression went slightly careful. That's a lot of information. It is. Most of it's in my calendar, which my assistant manages. I'll need access to the calendar. She looked at him for a moment with that measuring quality he was beginning to recognize as her default mode of processing new information. She didn't make decisions impulsively. She collected data, held it briefly, assessed, and then moved. I'll tell Sarah to give you read access, she said finally, not edit access. I don't need to edit it, Cole said. I need to see the patterns. She nodded. Then, the windows. Yes. You've been looking at them since you walked in. The parking structure across the street has public access to the upper levels, Cole said. You're visible from roughly 6 positions over there, depending on time of day. In the afternoon, when the sun angle drops, the reflection on your windows reduces external visibility significantly. In the morning, it doesn't. Vivian turned and looked at the windows for a moment, then back at him. So I shouldn't stand here in the mornings. I'd recommend not standing directly at the window at any time when you're in a fixed position for more than 30 seconds, Cole said. When you're moving, it's less of a concern. It's when you stop that you're predictable. She absorbed this. All right. She moved back toward her desk, and Cole noted that she moved without looking self-conscious about changing her behavior based on what he'd said, which some people found difficult. The adjustment between understanding a threat intellectually and physically modifying how you occupied a space. What else? They spent an hour going through it. The executive floor access protocols, which Cole identified 2 problems with, both involving the way contractor credentials were managed, which felt darkly relevant given what he'd found in the garage logs that morning. The building's external camera network, which had 2 coverage gaps on the northeast side of the ground floor that someone had clearly identified before planting the shell company credential. The driver rotation schedule for her vehicle detail, which was too predictable. Same 3 drivers in the same rotation every week, which meant anyone watching her movements for more than 10 days would know within 15 minutes which driver meant which destination. Vivian listened to all of it. She asked sharp questions. When he told her something needed to change, she agreed or pushed back with specific reasoning. And when she pushed back, she was usually right, which Cole found unexpectedly valuable. He'd done enough security assessments in a previous life to know that the person who lives and works inside a space sees things that the assessor misses. And Vivian's version of pushing back wasn't defensive resistance. It was active participation. By 11:30, they were on their 3rd coffee. Hers black, his with a little milk, which she'd had her assistant fetch without asking what he wanted and had simply guessed correctly, and working through the vehicle rotation problem when her phone rang. She looked at the screen and her expression changed. Not dramatically, just a tightening around the eyes and a slight shift in the set of her mouth that Cole had learned to read as the face she made when something had gone wrong. I need to take this, she said. Cole stood and moved to the window, far enough to give her privacy, but he stopped himself before reaching the glass and repositioned near the bookshelf instead, which was an adjustment that felt faintly ridiculous but that he made anyway, because the person who'd installed the habit in him many years ago had been deeply uninterested in when it was convenient. He heard fragments, not enough to follow the full conversation, but the tone of her voice shifted in a specific way. Still controlled, but a harder edge underneath, the kind that comes from managing anger in real time. When she hung up, she sat very still for a moment. The merger counterparty's lead counsel called, she said. They're aware of last night's incident. They're requesting a 60-day extension to the closing timeline, pending review of what they're calling the company's security environment. Her voice was level. Which means the quarter deadline passes, which means the workforce protection clause. The 243 people, Cole said. Yes. She stood up from the desk and walked to the east wall, away from the windows, which he noticed, and stood facing the bookshelves with her arms crossed. Their counsel is framing it as due diligence, standard risk reassessment, and legally they're not wrong. A security incident at the target company 2 days before a major close is a legitimate trigger for that kind of review. But the review isn't actually about due diligence, Cole said. She turned her head. No, the review is about someone at their firm getting a call this morning that encouraged them to see this as an opportunity to restructure the deal terms. She paused. I can't prove that, but I've been in this business for 9 years and I can recognize when a negotiation move is dressed up as a legal concern. Cole thought about Malcolm Vane sitting somewhere with a burner phone. Last night's contractors in custody, the direct attempt failed, and within 12 hours a flanking move through the merger's legal structure. He's pivoting, Cole said. Vivian looked at him fully. You think this is connected? I think someone who spent 14 months building shell companies inside your vendor network and 3 months planning what happened last night didn't get there by being reactive, Cole said. If the physical approach failed, the next move is to create enough chaos around the deal itself that it collapses under its own weight. No crime, no direct connection, just legal maneuvering that accomplishes the same goal. Vivian was quiet. He could see her turning it over, stress testing it, looking for the part that didn't hold. If you're right, she said slowly, then whoever is doing this has a contact at the counterparty firm, or at minimum someone who can make a call that gets taken seriously. Vane's been there 9 years, Cole said. How many of those relationships are his personally, rather than the company's? Vivian closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had settled. Not acceptance, more like the moment when someone stops arguing with the problem and starts working it. I need to call Marsh. Yes. She was already reaching for the phone. Cole walked back toward the window side of the room, carefully, and gave her the space to make the call. He stood beside the bookshelf and looked at the titles while she talked. A mix of business texts and history, and 3 novels that looked read rather than decorative, spines slightly cracked, one with a folded receipt for a bookmark. He looked at the receipt long enough to register it was from a grocery store on Capitol Hill, which meant she shopped for herself sometimes rather than having everything delivered, which meant she had moments of ordinary life that she didn't advertise. He found that detail unexpectedly human, which made him feel something he wasn't quite ready to identify. Vivian ended the call and stood with the phone in her hand for a moment. Marsh says the phone call to the counterparty counsel is consistent with a pattern they've been tracking. Vane has a relationship with a partner at the firm going back 8 years, before either of them was in their current roles. They've been monitoring communications but couldn't connect it to the current investigation. This gives them a thread. Good, Cole said. He also said... She stopped. He said that the attempt to derail the merger legally is actually useful to the investigation because it creates a traceable communication pattern. But he needs the deal to proceed, which means I need to get the counterparty's counsel back in a room and close this before the end of quarter deadline, which is... She looked at the calendar on her desk. 11 days from now. Is that enough time? It's not enough time, she said, but I've worked with less. She looked at him directly. I need to go to their offices in Chicago. There are 3 signatories who need to be in the room, and 2 of them won't fly here while there's an active security investigation around this building. I need to go to them. Cole's assessment mind was already running the problem. Chicago. A city with established patterns she didn't know as well as Denver. Different buildings, different routes, different exposure profile. When? I'd like to leave Friday morning, fly back Sunday evening or Monday morning. That's 48 hours from now, Cole said. Yes. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who knew exactly what she was asking and was waiting to see what he did with it. Cole thought about Maddie's spelling list, which was 37 words, and they'd gotten through maybe 22. About the grocery store run he hadn't made Tuesday and still hadn't made Wednesday. About the transmission diagnostic he'd left half-finished in sub-level 2, and about Bert's particular brand of long-suffering patience. I'll talk to Marsh, Cole said. If he can get his people in place in Chicago, and I'm looking at venue security only, I can have a preliminary assessment to Preston by Thursday afternoon. Vivian nodded. There was something in her expression that he thought might be relief, though she managed it very quietly. Thank you. It's an assessment, Cole said. Don't thank me for doing the math yet. Something moved across her face that was definitely closer to a smile than whatever she'd managed the night before. It lasted about 1 second. Is that how you do it? Only accept gratitude for completed work? Something like that. Efficient, she said. Practical, he said. She tilted her head slightly. There's a difference? Efficient is about the process, Cole said. Practical is about whether the thing actually needs doing. She considered this for a moment. And you've decided this needs doing. I've decided you're not going to stop doing it, Cole said. Those 243 people are going to be in your head the entire time, regardless of what anyone tells you about risk levels. And you're going to go to Chicago whether I'm involved or not. So yes, it needs doing. The silence that followed was the particular kind that comes when someone says something accurate about you that you didn't expect them to see. You do that, Vivian said finally. Do what? You say the actual thing, not the thing around the thing. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't categorize. Most people don't. Most people have more to lose from saying the actual thing, Cole said. And you don't? He thought about that genuinely, the way it deserved. I used to, he said. I learned it wasn't as expensive as it seemed. Vivian held his gaze for a moment, then looked down at her desk, at the calendar, at the phone, at the accumulated logistics of a day that had gone considerably further sideways than it had begun. I'll have Sarah send you the calendar access and the preliminary Chicago itinerary when I have it. I'll need the venue addresses, Cole said, and the hotel. I'll stay wherever you tell me to. You haven't heard any of my options yet. No, she said, but you'll have thought about it more carefully than anyone else will, and that's the relevant variable. Cole picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd laid it and headed for the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. The desk, he said, without turning around. What about it? Move it 45 degrees to the left. It puts your back to the interior wall when you're seated instead of the window side. The sightline from the parking structure changes. A pause. That's going to bother me every time I look at the room. Less than the alternative, Cole said, and left. In the elevator down, he called Mrs. Paulson and asked if she could keep Maddie Thursday night as well, and possibly Friday, and received the answer he expected, which was yes, with the attached information that Maddie had finished the spelling list on her own last night and gotten 34 out of 37, which was close enough that she should probably be allowed a small celebration of some kind, in Mrs. Paulson's opinion. Cole said he agreed with that assessment. He rode the elevator down to sub-level 2 and went back to the transmission diagnostic because the fleet manager on the 9th floor was still waiting, and a job half done was a job not done. And Cole Hargrove had been many things in his life, but he had never been the kind of person who left things half-finished. 2 floors above the garage, in a conference room he had no reason to enter, a junior member of Preston Door's security team was reviewing the results of a federal database query on the mechanic who had disarmed an attacker in this building the night before, and reading the findings with the specific wide-eyed quality of someone realizing they'd been standing next to something much larger than it looked. The query had returned results, but most of them were classified. What wasn't classified was enough. The junior team member printed the page, put it in a folder, and went to find Preston. Preston Door knocked on the frame of the open door to the 23rd floor conference room at 4:17 Wednesday afternoon, which was the room Cole had borrowed from Vivian's assistant to spread out the Chicago venue materials he'd been working through since noon. Preston was holding a manila folder with the careful grip of someone who wasn't sure yet what they were going to do with it. Cole looked up from the floor plan of the Chicago hotel he'd been marking with a red pen. "You have a minute?" Preston asked. "Yes." Preston came in and closed the door behind him and stood for a moment looking at the materials covering the conference table. The printed venue layouts, the handwritten route assessments, the annotated hotel floor plan, with an expression that was trying to stay neutral and not completely succeeding. Then he put the folder on the table and slid it toward Cole without saying anything. Cole opened it. The federal database query was thorough in the way that official documents are thorough, organized, precise, and in this case mostly consisting of redaction bars so thick they covered entire paragraphs. What wasn't redacted was a service record, 9 years in the United States Navy, the last 6 attached to a Special Operations Command whose specific designation had been blacked out, an honorable discharge dated 4 years and 3 months ago, and a list of commendations and service citations that ran to a page and a half before the redaction swallowed the rest. Cole looked at it for a moment. Then he closed the folder and slid it back. "Where'd you pull this?" he asked. "I have contacts," Preston said. "Former law enforcement. It wasn't difficult." He paused. "The classified portions, I don't know what's under them. My contacts don't have that level of clearance." "Neither does most anyone," Cole said. Preston pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. He wasn't doing the swagger thing anymore, the wide posture, the projection of easy authority. He was just sitting, which made him look like a different person. Older. More honest, maybe. "I owe you an apology." "You already gave me one." "That one was for Tuesday evening," Preston said. "This one's for the fact that I had 2 people in this building for a year and a half, a cleaning crew that didn't exist and a shell vendor entry in the access log, and my team didn't catch it. My sweep the afternoon of the incident ran the credential and cleared it because it was a valid credential, and I didn't build any secondary verification into the protocol because I figured valid meant safe, which is a fundamental mistake that I should not have made at this level." Cole looked at him. "Chen told you about Meridian?" "This morning, yes." Preston's jaw was tight. "Someone used a company that Vane set up 14 months ago to walk into this building 2 hours before Ms. Blackwood arrived. My team let them in because the paperwork was right." "It was a well-constructed insertion," Cole said. "The paperwork was right because someone spent a year making it right. That's not a gap in your team's execution. That's a gap in your verification architecture. Different problem." Preston was quiet for a moment. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Being more generous than I deserve." "I'm being accurate," Cole said. "There's a difference between an operator making a mistake and a system having a design flaw. Your sweep protocol is designed to catch known threats and invalid credentials. It's not designed to catch valid credentials attached to entities that were built from the ground up to pass inspection. Those are 2 different security problems." Preston looked at the folder on the table. "What's under the redactions?" "Things that don't matter right now," Cole said. "They might matter to how I work with you." Cole considered this for a moment. He'd been having a version of this conversation, or avoiding it, for 4 years. The mechanic thing wasn't a lie. He fixed cars. He did it well, and it was genuinely the life he'd chosen. But the architecture underneath it had never completely gone away, the way certain kinds of training never go away. And there were moments when the distance between who he was now and who he'd been became impossible to maintain without actively working at it, and those moments were becoming more frequent rather than less as this week progressed. "I did 9 years, Cole said. "The last 6 were special operations. The work was real, and it mattered, and it also cost more than I'd budgeted for, and when my wife died, I made a decision and I got out." Preston absorbed this. "Your wife?" "She died while I was on deployment. By the time I got back, my daughter had spent months not knowing if she had a father coming home. I decided she needed a father more than the work needed me." A long silence. The kind that happens when someone has been handed more than they expected and is figuring out where to put it. "I didn't know," Preston said. "Nobody in this building did," Cole said. "That was the point." Preston nodded slowly. He looked at the conference table with its spread of venue materials. Chicago, Friday morning. "Marsh briefed me this morning," Preston said. "I wants my team plus a federal protection detail for the duration. I'm coordinating with a Chicago PD liaison." He paused. "He also told me you were doing the venue assessment." "Just the assessment," Cole said. "Sightlines, access points, timing, I'll hand it off." Preston looked at him with the careful eyes of a man reconsidering the entire frame around someone. "You don't want the security role?" "No. Even now. After all this." "Especially now," Cole said. "I have a daughter who needs a father who comes home, and taking on a protection role for your principal puts me in the middle of something that doesn't end when the deal closes. I'll do the assessment because I can do it well, and it needs doing. I won't do the rest." Preston was quiet for a moment. "I respect that," he said, and he said it in the tone of someone meaning it rather than filling space with words. "The hotel in Chicago," Cole said, pulling the floor plan back toward himself. "I'm recommending they move her to a different property than the one currently booked. The booked hotel has a ballroom event on Saturday that opens the ground floor to outside vendors for setup beginning at 6 a.m. That's 32 hours of elevated external access to the building during her stay." Preston leaned forward and looked at the floor plan. "What's your alternative?" They worked through it for the next hour and a half. Cole talked through the venues, the routes, the timing windows. Preston asked good questions, better than Cole had expected, which confirmed what Vivian had said about him rebuilding his own protocols from the ground up after Tuesday. He had a solid operational mind when his ego wasn't in the way, and his ego appeared to have taken significant enough damage in the past 48 hours that it had temporarily stopped interfering. By the time they finished, the sun had moved off the western windows, and the conference room had gone from warm afternoon light to the cooler, flatter light of early evening. Preston gathered his notes and stood. "Hargrove," he said. Cole looked up. "For what it's worth. What you did Tuesday night—" Preston stopped, regrouped. "I've been doing security work for 16 years. I've worked with some capable people. What you did in that garage was—" He stopped again. "I just want you to know I saw it." Cole looked at him steadily. "I saw it too," he said, "and it cost me 2 days of work and a sore shoulder, so let's make sure the rest of this goes more quietly." Preston almost smiled. It changed his face considerably. "I'll hold you to that," he said, and left. Cole sat in the empty conference room for a few minutes after Preston left. The floor plan of the Chicago hotel was in front of him, covered in red pen marks, and he looked at it without really seeing it. He was thinking about the folder, about the redaction bars, about what was under them. He was thinking about Kandahar and a rooftop at 2 a.m. with a scope and a wind reading that kept shifting and a team of 6 men who were waiting on his judgment and his patience. I was thinking about the particular quality of silence in certain kinds of terrain that wasn't peaceful but was instead charged with the potential for violence, and how he'd learned to exist inside that silence without it consuming him, and how he'd brought a version of that silence home with him and worn it like a second skin for 9 years until it had become indistinguishable from who he was. He was thinking about the day he'd come back from his last deployment and walked into a house that had been managed for 4 months by his sister-in-law, and Maddie had been sitting at the kitchen table with a coloring book and had looked up when he came in and not run to him the way she used to, but had instead looked at him with careful eyes. His eyes, he realized then, the same shape and color, the eyes of a child who had learned not to be entirely sure about something. He'd put down his bag. He'd sat down on the floor next to her chair, and he'd asked her what she was coloring. She'd shown him. A horse. She'd colored it green because she'd run out of brown. He'd said it was the best green horse he'd ever seen. She'd laughed. The laugh had broken something open in his chest that had been sealed so long he hadn't known it was sealed. He was thinking about how he'd put in his separation papers 6 weeks later and never doubted it, not once, not even on the days when he missed the work with an ache that had no good language for itself. He was thinking about Maddie saying 34 out of 37 and the 3 she'd gotten wrong, and whether the 3 she'd gotten wrong were the hard ones or the easy ones she'd second-guessed herself on, which was a pattern she had, the second-guessing, which she'd probably gotten from him. He folded the Chicago hotel floor plan, put it with his other materials, and started packing up the conference table. He called Mrs. Paulson on his way to the elevator and asked about dinner. "She made herself a peanut butter sandwich," Mrs. Paulson reported. "And then she made one for me because she felt bad eating in front of me. She's 8 years old and she made me a sandwich." Cole stood in the hallway outside the elevator and felt something shift in his chest. "I'll be home in an hour," he said. "Take your time. We're watching a nature program." He took the elevator down and walked through the lobby and out into the Denver evening, which was cold now, with a front coming in from the north and the kind of dry mountain cold that gets into your bones immediately and doesn't apologize for it. He walked the 6 blocks home at a pace slightly faster than necessary, not because he was late, but because he wanted to get there. Maddie was asleep on Mrs. Paulson's couch when he arrived, curled under an Afghan with one arm hanging off the edge. The nature program was still running on low volume, something about migration patterns in East African plains. Mrs. Paulson handed Cole a cup of tea he didn't ask for, which he drank standing in her kitchen while she told him about the spelling test and the sandwich, and also about how Maddie had spent 40 minutes during the afternoon trying to teach Mrs. Paulson's ancient tabby cat to shake hands, with total conviction that the cat was capable of learning and simply choosing not to. "She's patient," Mrs. Paulson said, "with things that won't cooperate. She gets that from you." Cole put the cup down. "I'm going to be in Chicago Friday and Saturday, possibly into Sunday." Mrs. Paulson nodded without asking why. "I'll manage." "I know you will." Cole paused. "I need to pay you for this week." You need to carry your daughter home before she wakes up and pretends she wasn't asleep, Mrs. Paulson said, and went back to her nature program. Cole lifted Maddie carefully off the couch. She was at the age where she was getting heavy enough that this was a real undertaking rather than an easy thing, and his shoulder registered a pointed complaint, and carried her down the hall and into their apartment and into her room. She stirred when he put her down. "Dad," her voice was blurry with sleep. "Right here." "Did you eat something today?" He hadn't, actually, not a real meal. "Yes," he said. She made a sound that suggested she wasn't completely convinced but lacked the energy to pursue it. "Mrs. Paulson said you were helping someone." "I am." "Is it dangerous?" Cole sat on the edge of her bed. The room was small. They'd done what they could with it. A few drawings on the walls that Maddie had done herself. A bookshelf that was overcrowded and slightly listing. A glow-in-the-dark star stuck crookedly on the ceiling above her bed that they'd put up together 2 summers ago and never taken down. "Less dangerous than it was at the beginning of the week," he said. Maddie thought about this for a moment with the seriousness that she brought to things she considered important. "Is it because of what happened at the building? On the news?" "Yes." "Were you there?" "Yes." "Were you okay?" "I was okay," he said. "Are you still okay?" "I'm still okay, Mad." She looked at him with those careful eyes, his shape, his color, and he held very still under the weight of them because she was 8 years old and she already knew how to look at him in a way that got past the parts of himself he kept quiet. She'd been doing it since she was 3. He suspected she'd been doing it before that, and he just hadn't been paying attention. "The lady on the news," Maddie said. "The CEO one. She was nice looking." Cole looked at his daughter. "She's a complicated person," he said carefully. "That's not what I asked." Cole was quiet for a moment. 8, he thought. She was 8 years old. "Get some sleep," he said. Maddie gave him one more look that communicated everything she'd chosen not to say out loud, and then she pulled the covers up and turned toward the wall. Cole sat on the edge of the bed for another minute, in the dark, in the small room with its listing bookshelf and its crooked glow-in-the-dark star. Then he stood up quietly and went to the kitchen to find something to eat. Thursday passed in the particular way of days with too much happening in them, compressed and stretched at the same time, with certain moments expanding beyond their allotted time and others collapsing before they'd fully registered. Cole delivered the security assessment to Preston and Marsh in a 2-hour meeting at Marsh's field office downtown, during which Marsh's technical analyst asked 17 questions about the venue access points that Cole answered in sequence, and during which Preston sat very straight and took notes, and offered 3 additions to the route assessment that were actually good, which Cole said so, which seemed to catch Preston slightly off guard. Marsh confirmed at the end of the meeting that the communication between Vane and the counterparty counsel's office had now been traced through 2 additional contact points, and that a federal warrant was in process for Vane's financial records. The full picture, not the partial view they'd been working with through subpoenas. "We need the merger to close," Marsh said for the 3rd time in the meeting, which told Cole how much of his case was riding on the audit it would trigger. "It'll close," Cole said, which was not a promise, just a thing that felt true. He stopped at the grocery store on the way home Thursday evening and bought actual food for the first time since the previous weekend. Food that required cooking rather than just assembly, because Maddie was 8 and was at the age where she was starting to notice the difference between a father who cooked dinner and a father who managed the situation. He made pasta with a sauce that was not elaborate but took 40 minutes and required attention, and Maddie sat at the kitchen table doing the last of her homework and periodically reporting on its difficulty level, and when dinner was ready they ate at the table instead of the couch, which was a distinction that mattered in a way Cole couldn't entirely articulate but felt clearly. "Tell me 3 things about your day," he said. This was a thing they'd done since Maddie was 5. 3 things, which could be anything, good, bad, ordinary, strange. Maddie had a rule that at least one of the 3 had to be something she'd noticed rather than something that happened to her, which Cole had instituted early on and which she'd kept voluntarily well past the point where he'd stopped enforcing it. "1," she said, "Tyler dropped his tray at lunch and everyone clapped, which made him feel worse, and I didn't clap." She said this not with pride, but with the matter-of-fact quality of someone reporting a simple decision. 2. I noticed that the tree outside the classroom window has been losing its leaves from the top down, not all at once, And I don't know if that's how all trees work or just that one. She paused. 3. Mrs. Paulson cried a little bit during the nature program. The part about the animals migrating. She didn't say anything about it, but I saw. Cole looked at his daughter. What did you do? I moved closer to her on the couch, Maddie said simply. Without making a thing of it. Cole was quiet for a moment. What are your 3? Maddie asked. He'd done 3 things every evening since they'd started this. He never skipped it, and he never recycled. 1. I noticed that the mountain front coming in from the north changed the smell of the air this morning. Cold and dry, different from yesterday. He paused. 2. A man I work with apologized to me for something he'd done wrong, and he meant it, which is harder than it sounds. He stopped again. 3. I carried you home last night and my shoulder hurt the entire way, and I didn't care even slightly. Maddie looked at him. Something in her expression was so carefully measured and so precisely warm that it was almost more than he could hold comfortably. Your shoulder still hurts? Yes. You should ice it. I will. You won't, she said. I'll think about it, he said. She looked at him for another beat and then went back to her pasta, and Cole ate his dinner and let the ordinary evening wash over him the way ordinary evenings did, imperfectly, incompletely, with a child who was too observant and a kitchen that needed repainting and a life that was smaller than the one he'd had before and more real than that one had ever managed to be. He left for the airport Friday morning at 5:45, after leaving a note on the refrigerator that said, 34 out of 37 is excellent. Work on necessary. See you Sunday. Dad. He put $20 under the note in case Maddie and Mrs. Paulson wanted to walk to the taco place on Federal that Maddie had been asking to try for 3 weeks. He'd been to Chicago before, in the other life, but that Chicago was nothing like this one. Different neighborhoods, different purposes, different version of himself moving through it. The one he was in now was gray and cold off Lake Michigan, with a wind that came off the water with the specific grievance of November arriving in October. And the hotel he'd booked Vivian into was on Michigan Avenue, a mid-range business property with 2 access points and sightlines that were manageable, not because it was fancy, but because its layout was practical, and its management had agreed without much resistance to 2 protocol adjustments Cole had called in Thursday evening. Vivian arrived at O'Hare 2 hours after Cole, with Preston and 2 of his team members, plus a federal agent named Kowalski, who had the flat-eyed competence of someone who had done protection details long enough that they'd stopped being interesting. Cole met them at the hotel because he'd already walked the routes and checked the conference room in the building 3 blocks away, where the merger meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning. Vivian came into the hotel lobby with her carry-on and her attorney, and the look of someone who had slept on the plane and was running on the specific kind of sustained energy that came from a problem you'd committed fully to solving. She spotted Cole near the elevator bank and altered course toward him without breaking stride. How's the room? She asked. Corner suite on the 8th floor, Cole said. Elevator bank is to the right when you exit. Stairwell is 30 feet to the left. Emergency exit is at the end of the hall. Preston has the protocol. The conference venue? 3 blocks north. Ground floor meeting space, which I'd normally flag, but the room they've assigned is interior, no exterior windows, single access point from the main lobby that's controllable. It's actually better than if they'd put you on an upper floor. Vivian nodded. The counterparty's team arrives at 9 tomorrow morning. Preston's team will be at the venue from 7, Cole said. I'll walk you over. She looked at him. You're staying through the meeting. I'm staying through the meeting, Cole confirmed. Something in her expression shifted, briefly, quietly. Not surprise exactly. More like something she'd been holding in careful suspension, releasing a small amount of tension. All right, she said. They rode the elevator to the 8th floor with Preston and Kowalski and her attorney, and Cole noted the elevator timing and the corridor layout and the side angle from the stairwell access door. And none of this was particularly extraordinary. It was simply the way his mind worked in certain environments, the way it had always worked. Cataloging, assessing, building a 3-dimensional model of the space and the risks inside it. What was slightly unusual was the way Vivian did it too. He caught her doing it, a quick scan of the corridor when they stepped off the elevator, a slight pause at the corner to check the sightline, a glance at the stairwell door as they passed. It was subtler than what he did and probably unconscious, the product of 2 days in environments where Cole had been quietly teaching her what to notice by noticing it himself in front of her. But it was there. He didn't say anything about it. They reached her room and Preston ran through the protocol with her, which was thorough and included 3 additions from Cole's assessment that Preston delivered without attribution, which Cole appreciated. And then her attorney had questions about tomorrow's meeting that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with contract language, and Cole and Preston stepped back into the corridor. Preston leaned against the wall. He looked tired, the managed kind of tired that comes from running on professional discipline. "She's going to close it," he said, not a question. "Yes," Cole said. "How confident are you in the venue?" 75%, Cole said honestly. "The remaining 25 is the counterparty attendees and their own security arrangements, which I don't control. Kowalski's good. Your 2 people are better than I'd have said on Tuesday." Preston absorbed this. They improved their protocols. "I noticed." Another silence. A maid's cart moved past them at the end of the corridor, and they both watched it without appearing to. And Preston gave Cole a sideways look that acknowledged they'd both just done the same thing simultaneously without coordinating it. "Occupational hazard," Preston said. "Never really goes away," Cole agreed. The corridor was quiet after the cart turned the corner. Somewhere on the floor, an ice machine cycled on with a mechanical clunk. "Can I ask you something?" Preston said. "Yes." "If the situation on Tuesday had gone differently, if you hadn't been there." He paused. "What do you think the outcome would have been?" Cole thought about the 4 to 6 minute window Chen had described, about the narrow construction zone on Wazi Street, about 2 men who moved like they'd rehearsed the approach. "I think the outcome would have been determined primarily by how quickly your team recognized what was actually happening rather than what it looked like," he said. "They might have gotten there in time. It was close." But close is not the same as yes," Cole said. Preston was quiet for a long moment. "I keep thinking about that," he said. "The close." He said it with the particular weight of a person who has been running a scenario on a loop and can't quite get it to stop. "I know," Cole said. "Put it somewhere useful and then put it down. You can't run good operations on that kind of fuel." Preston looked at him. "Is that something they taught you or something you figured out?" "Figured out," Cole said. "The hard way." Preston nodded slowly, and they stood in the hotel corridor for another minute in the companionable silence of 2 men who had arrived at a mutual understanding through a route neither of them would have chosen. And then Preston's radio crackled, and he answered it, and the evening moved forward. The merger meeting the next morning ran for 7 hours. Cole wasn't in the room, that wasn't his place, and he didn't want it to be. But he was in the corridor outside with Kowalski and Preston's 2 team members, and he could hear the rhythm of it through the closed door without hearing the words, the long silences, the raised voices that dropped back to normal, the particular cadence of negotiation that has stakes attached to it rather than just positions. At 2:40 in the afternoon, the door opened. Vivian came out. Her jacket was off. Her hair had come partially loose again on the same side as Tuesday night, which Cole was beginning to think might simply be the side that gave up first under pressure. Her attorney was behind her with a look of controlled elation that he was doing a mediocre job of containing. She looked at Cole. "We got the workforce clause," she said. Her voice was steady, but underneath it was something that sounded like it needed about 3 days of sleep to fully surface. "All 243, Cole said. "All 243, she confirmed. Preston said something appropriate. Kowalski shook Vivian's attorney's hand. The counterparty team filed out with the particular body language of people who'd negotiated hard and had given more than they intended but couldn't entirely regret how things had landed. Vivian stood in the corridor, and for a moment she just breathed. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't cry or collapse or do anything that could be described as a release. She stood with her jacket over one arm and her posture slightly less constructed than usual, and she breathed, and Cole stood nearby and let her. Because some moments don't need witnesses so much as they need someone willing to not make them into a performance. After a moment, she looked at him. "You said it would close." "I said it felt true," Cole said. "Same thing." "Not really," he said, "but I'll take it." Something in her expression did the thing it had been doing periodically since Tuesday night. The thing where a door opened briefly and then closed, except that each time it seemed to close slightly less completely than the time before. She was looking at him with something that had moved past assessment and wasn't quite sure yet what it was becoming. "Dinner," she said. "You're not going to say no." Cole opened his mouth. "The shoulder," she said. "I know it still hurts. I can tell by the way you've been standing. And you skipped lunch because you were managing the corridor rotation with Kowalski, and I skipped lunch because I was in a room arguing about indemnification clauses. And Preston has his team's debrief, and you and I are going to find somewhere quiet and eat an actual meal, and you're going to let someone say thank you properly for the first time this week." Cole looked at her for a long moment. "I know a place 2 blocks from here," he said. "Nothing fancy. Good food." "Perfect," she said. They walked the 2 blocks through the Chicago cold with Kowalski at a discreet distance because Cole had allowed one concession on that point and no others, and the wind off the lake was relentless and cold and completely indifferent to the week either of them had just survived, and Cole walked with his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulder aching steadily, and something in his chest that was complicated and not entirely unwelcome, and Vivian walked beside him in her blazer with her jacket held over her arm because she'd refused to put it back on for reasons she didn't explain. And the city moved around them the way cities do, enormous and indifferent, and somehow, in the particular way of certain moments, exactly the right size. The restaurant was a corner Italian place with mismatched chairs and candles and wine bottles, and a menu that was 3 pages handwritten and changed every few days. They got a table near the back because Cole always sat near the back, and the waiter brought bread that was still warm and olive oil in a shallow bowl and didn't hover. Vivian looked at the menu. "Order for me," she said. "I've been making decisions for 7 hours, and I'm temporarily out." Cole ordered without looking at the menu, because he'd been here before in the other life, and some things, surprisingly, stayed the same. When the waiter left, Vivian set her menu down and looked at him with the direct, measuring quality that he'd come to recognize as simply the way she was. Not a performance of confidence, but the actual thing, which was rarer than it looked. "I want to know about your wife," she said. Cole looked at her steadily. "That's a significant ask." "I know it is." She didn't flinch from it. "You don't have to, but I'd like to understand." I was quiet for a moment. The candle between them made small adjustments to the air currents from the ventilation above, and the light shifted with it, and the restaurant was warm after the cold walk. And Cole sat with the question the way he sat with most things, not rushing it, letting it settle into its actual shape. "Her name was Rachel," he said. "She was funny in a way that came out of nowhere, dry. She could say something in a completely flat voice that would take you 3 seconds to realize was the funniest thing you'd heard all week." He paused. "She wanted a quiet life. She got it for a while, and then she didn't, and she managed the parts she didn't want without complaint, which I understood at the time as strength and understand now as something she shouldn't have had to do alone." Vivian was listening with her full attention in the way that some people can and most people only approximate. "She had an aneurysm," Cole said. "No warning. She was 34. I was 6,000 miles away, and by the time I knew, it had already been 3 days. And Maddie had been with Rachel's sister for those 3 days, not knowing what was going to happen." He stopped. "When I came home, Maddie looked at me the way she'd look at someone she wasn't sure she could count on. She was 4 years old." He didn't say the rest of it. He didn't need to. Vivian was quiet for a moment. "So you stayed," she said. "I stayed." "Not because you couldn't do the work anymore." "Not because of that," Cole said. "I could still do the work. That was never the question. The question was what the work cost." "The question was who paid for it," Cole said. "Maddie had already paid once. I wasn't going to let her pay twice." Vivian looked at him across the table in the candlelight of the mismatched chair restaurant with the handwritten menu and the wine bottle candles, and the thing in her expression that had been opening incrementally all week opened a little further, and Cole saw it clearly and didn't look away from it. "She sounds like she's remarkable," Vivian said. "Your daughter." "She made Mrs. Paulson a peanut butter sandwich because she felt bad eating in front of her," Cole said. "She's 8 years old." Vivian smiled. It was a full one. Not the partial version he'd been seeing all week, the one that started and then thought better of itself. This one completed. It changed her entire face, opened it up in a way that made her look younger and less constructed, and considerably more like the person underneath the CEO that everyone feared. Cole looked at it for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. The food arrived, and they ate, And outside, the Chicago wind kept working at the city with its cold, indifferent persistence, and the week with all its weight sat somewhere outside the restaurant door, waiting for Monday morning. And for the first time in recent memory, Cole Hargrove sat at a dinner table with someone other than his daughter and didn't feel the pull to be somewhere else. They flew back to Denver on Sunday morning, separate flights because Cole had booked his own ticket and Vivian's team had booked hers. And Cole didn't see any reason to change that arrangement, even after Friday night's dinner, which had lasted 2.5 hours and had covered territory he hadn't expected to cover with anyone, let alone someone he'd known for 4 days. He sat in a middle seat on the return flight. He'd booked late, and the window and aisle were gone, between a college student with headphones and an older man reading a paperback Western, and he looked at the seat back in front of him and thought about what happened next in the way he thought about most problems, systematically, without flinching from the parts that were complicated. What happened next was Malcolm Vane. Everything else, the dinner, the merger, the particular quality of Vivian's smile when it completed itself, was real and would need to be thought about eventually. But Vane was the weight still sitting in the room, and until that weight was removed, nothing else could settle into its proper place. Cole had known this since Wednesday morning when Chen told him the case was compelling but not airtight. The merger had closed on Saturday. The independent audit would begin Monday. Whether that was fast enough depended on whether Vane understood that his window had closed and accepted it, or whether he decided to do something about it first. Cole did not think Malcolm Vane was the kind of man who accepted things quietly. He was right. Marsh called at 11:47 Sunday morning while Cole was in a cab from DIA heading back to his apartment. "We have a problem," Marsh said, which was not the way Cole had hoped to begin the day. "Tell me." Vane didn't come into the office this morning. He was scheduled for a 10 o'clock internal meeting, routine, nothing that should have spooked him. He didn't show. His assistant tried his cell and got voicemail. "We had a unit go to the Cherry Creek house at 11:15. A pause. "The house is empty. Car's gone. His personal laptop is gone. His passport is not in the house, which we know because we had a warrant to search it." Cole was quiet for a moment. Outside the cab window, Denver's brown autumn sprawl moved past. "When did you last have confirmed eyes on him?" "Friday evening. He attended a dinner in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. Business contacts. Nothing suspicious on the surface. Left at 9:40 p.m. That's the last confirmed visual." 38 hours, Cole said. "Yes." "He knew," Cole said. "He knew the merger was closing Saturday." "His contact at the counterparty firm likely told him when the deal went through," Marsh said, "which means he had roughly—" Marsh paused, doing the arithmetic. 18 to 20 hours to make a decision and move. "He moved," Cole said. "He moved," Marsh confirmed. "We have federal alerts out. Airport flags triggered on his passport as of this morning, which means if he tries to use it at any domestic airport or international port of entry, we'll know. But if he had a secondary identity prepared, does your financial profile on him suggest the kind of long-term planning that would include a secondary identity?" A short silence. "Yes," Marsh said. "Unfortunately, yes." Cole thought about the Meridian Building Solutions credential, set up 14 months before it was used. He thought about a man who had moved $8 to $11 million through layered accounts over 4 years without tripping a single automated flag until a dedicated investigation went looking for it specifically. He thought about the burner phone, the level 4 VoIP routing, the careful distance between himself and every operational element. He didn't panic after Tuesday, Cole said. He pivoted. He tried the legal route through the counterparty counsel. That failed Saturday afternoon. He had a contingency for that too. The secondary identity. "Built and ready," Cole said. "Probably for years." The cab stopped at a light. The driver had talk radio on low, a sports program, something about the upcoming football season, voices cheerful and entirely unaware. Cole looked at the phone in his hand. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Nothing operational," Marsh said, quickly enough that Cole understood the answer had been prepared. "I want you to know the situation. I also want you to make sure Ms. Blackwood's security posture doesn't relax because the merger closed. Until we have Vane, the picture is incomplete." "I'll talk to Preston," Cole said. "I've already called him. I called you because—" Marsh paused. "I called you because you've been right about this man's behavior at every step, and I've learned to treat that as a resource worth maintaining." Cole looked out the cab window. "He'll surface," he said. Men who've spent that much energy building a life don't disappear into nothing without needing something from the life they left. Financial, personal, logistical. Something will pull him back into a visible range. That's what my analysts say, Marsh said. I wanted to hear it from you. It's what I say too, Cole said. I just can't tell you when. He hung up and stared at the city for the rest of the ride home. Maddie was at Mrs. Paulson's when he got back, and Mrs. Paulson met him at her door with a look that communicated she'd seen the news ticker about a fugitive financial executive and had strong opinions about Cole's involvement in the situation, but had chosen, characteristically, not to voice them. She simply handed him a plate covered in aluminum foil and said, Maddie had made chocolate chip pancakes that morning and had insisted on saving some for him, and Cole took the plate and said thank you, and Mrs. Paulson said, go get your daughter, and Cole went. Maddie heard him in the hallway and came running in the way she still did at 8, unguardedly, without the measured cool that he could see developing at the edges of her personality, and that would probably complete itself in another few years, and that he both understood and was in no hurry for. She ran into his arms, and he caught her and held her, and his shoulder screamed, and he didn't care even slightly. You're back, she said into his jacket. I'm back, he said. Did the lady close her deal? She did. Maddie leaned back and looked at him with those careful eyes. Are you done helping her? Cole thought about that honestly, the way it deserved. The main part's done, he said. Maddie studied him for another moment with the penetrating quality that she deployed selectively and with considerable accuracy. Then she said, the pancakes are probably cold, and wriggled down and went to tell Mrs. Paulson goodbye. And Cole stood in the hallway holding a plate of cold chocolate chip pancakes and feeling the specific weight of a life that was small and true and entirely his. He ate the pancakes cold at his kitchen table while Maddie unpacked his bag for him, which she'd taken to doing at some point in the last year. Not because he asked, but because she'd decided it needed to be done and she was going to do it. He watched her carry his toiletry bag to the bathroom and his dirty laundry to the hamper and his work notes to the desk. And he thought about what Vivian had said at dinner on Friday, that the person who raised someone like Maddie was not a person who had stepped back from an extraordinary life, but one who had made it. He hadn't known what to say to that at the time. He still wasn't sure. Malcolm Vane surfaced 11 days later, not in Denver, not in Colorado. He surfaced at a small regional airport in southern Arizona, 40 miles from the Mexican border, where a pilot filed a flight plan under a name that triggered a secondary review because a detail in the associated documentation didn't align precisely with the federal database entry for the identity it claimed. The secondary review took 6 hours because it was a regional facility with limited staff, and by the time a federal alert generated, the plane had landed on the Mexican side and the name attached to it had vanished into the geography of Sonora. But the plane hadn't taken off from the regional airport. It had taken off from a private airfield outside Pueblo, Colorado, which meant Vane had been in Colorado the entire 11 days. And the private airfield had security cameras. And the security cameras had recorded a vehicle that matched the description of Vane's personal car. And the vehicle had been parked in a long-term lot at a storage facility in Colorado Springs since the Sunday he'd disappeared. Inside the storage unit registered to the same secondary identity, federal agents found documentation for 3 additional identities, $400,000 in sequenced currency, and a laptop that Vane had apparently considered too risky to take across the border and had left behind with the intention of accessing remotely. The laptop's contents, according to Marsh when he called Cole on a Wednesday evening 3 weeks after the garage, were comprehensive. The full accounting of the shell vendor scheme, transaction records that linked Vane to every Meridian Credential access event, communications with the 2 men who had been arrested in Sublevel 2, and most significantly, a series of encrypted messages with the partner at the counterparty law firm, which constituted wire fraud on top of everything else, and which implicated a second individual who had believed himself to be operating at sufficient remove to be untouchable. He's in Mexico, Marsh said. We have international cooperation requests in motion. It's a process, and it's going to be a long one, but he's not invisible anymore. He's just inconvenient. He'll make a mistake, Cole said. He doesn't have his infrastructure anymore. He's operating off whatever he had in that storage unit plus whatever he'd planned in advance. And advanced planning only gets you so far when the situation keeps not matching what you planned for. That's a generous timeline for justice, Marsh said, with a dryness that Cole appreciated. It's an accurate one, Cole said. He's 48 hours ahead, but he's not free. Those are different things. The arrest warrant was issued that week. The international request was filed. The story made the news in Denver in a way that was substantial enough to matter, and that named Cole once, in a single paragraph, as the Blackwood Tower maintenance employee who had first identified the vehicle tampering. It called him a maintenance employee, not a mechanic, and did not mention the Navy, the Special Operations record, or anything else, which was exactly the level of visibility Cole had wanted, and which suggested that either Marsh or Chen, or both of them, had actively managed what information was released to whom. He was grateful for that, though he didn't say so to either of them. The news cycle moved on within a week, because news cycles always do, and the Blackwood Tower went back to being a building with underground parking and a fleet of vehicles that needed servicing. And Cole went back to his toolbox and his diagnostic equipment and Bert's long-suffering paperwork management, and the routine of the garage settled back around him like something familiar putting itself back on. Except that it wasn't quite the same. Some things don't go back exactly the way they were, not because they've been damaged, but because the person looking at them has shifted, and the same object seen from a slightly different angle looks like a different object, even though nothing about it has changed. Cole noticed this in small ways. He noticed it when he worked and found himself checking the security camera on Pillar 7 automatically every morning, a 15-second habit that he'd apparently installed in himself during the course of 1 week, and that showed no signs of uninstalling. He noticed it when the access logs for new vendors crossed his desk for an unrelated reason, and he read them more carefully than was technically his job. He noticed it in the way he looked at the building differently, not with anxiety, just with the awake quality of someone who had been reminded that environments contain more than their surfaces suggest. He noticed it in other ways too. Vivian had sent a text on the Sunday he returned from Chicago. It said, "The pancakes you mentioned, did your daughter actually make them herself, or is that something you say to make her sound impressive?" Cole had looked at that text for a moment, then replied, "She made them. She's been making them since she was 6. She stands on a step stool, and I spot the batter pouring because she has a tendency to overfill." Vivian had replied after a moment, "That's extremely specific. She gets the specificity from me." A longer pause. Then, "I believe that." They texted periodically over the following weeks. Nothing with a clear shape or declared intention, the kind of communication that builds itself without anyone announcing they're building it. Cole found himself reading her messages with more attention than he'd expected. She was funny in ways that came out of nowhere, which reminded him of something he didn't examine too closely. Her humor was dry and fast and occasionally ruthless, and she deployed it precisely in the way she deployed everything else, deliberately, with good aim. She asked about Maddie sometimes. Not as conversation filler, but specifically, what was the spelling progress? Had she conquered necessary? What was the green horse situation? Cole answered specifically, because that was how he answered things, and because the questions deserved it. He did not ask himself too many questions about what this was, because he'd learned from the first time around that asking too many questions about something that was still forming was a reliable way to interrupt its formation. He let it be what it was, which was two people who had been through something together and were finding, without rushing it, what shape that left behind. 6 weeks after the garage, Vivian called, not texted, called, on a Thursday evening while Cole was making dinner, and Maddie was at the kitchen table doing a project on the water cycle that involved a surprising amount of crayon. "I want to talk to you about something," Vivian said, which was her version of a preamble. "All right. The audit is complete. The full scope of Vane's scheme is documented. The 2 men from the garage have both entered plea arrangements. The partner at the counterparty firm has been suspended pending his own investigation." And shh, she paused. "Malcolm Vane was located in Guadalajara this morning. Mexican federal authorities, acting on the international cooperation request, arrested him at the apartment he'd been renting under the third identity. He's in custody. Extradition proceedings start next week." Cole set down the spatula he'd been holding. "Marsh called you?" 10 minutes ago. I thought you should hear it." He stood in his kitchen with the phone to his ear and the dinner going on the stove, and Maddie narrating the water cycle project to herself in the way she did when she was working something out, and something released in his chest that he hadn't quite registered as held until it let go. "Good," he said. "That's all? Good? What would you like me to say?" "I don't know," Vivian said. "Something commensurate with the fact that a man who tried to have me killed is now in a Mexican federal detention facility. He made a mistake, Cole said. I told Marsh he would. You did, Vivian said. Marsh told me. He also told me... She stopped. He said the access log work you did on Wednesday morning, before anyone even knew to look at it, that the Meridian thread was the first clean evidence trail they had that tied Vane's operation to a specific physical action, that everything else was financial, which required the audit to confirm. But the garage access was operational, and operational evidence is different in court. Chen would have found it, Cole said. Eventually, Vivian said. You found it before 8 a.m. on a Wednesday while running a transmission diagnostic. I had context, Cole said. I'd been under the car. I knew what didn't belong. A pause. I want to do something, Vivian said, about the garage. Cole's attention sharpened slightly. What about it? Not for the reason you're already constructing in your head, she said, which was accurate enough that he almost smiled. Not a reward, not recognition. I want to talk to you about a business arrangement, a real one, with actual terms. I've had our corporate development team look at the market gap in professional-grade maintenance services for executive vehicle fleets in Denver, and there is one, and someone is going to fill it, and I would like that someone to be a person I trust completely to do work that is exactly what it says it is. Cole was quiet. The building has 12 other corporate tenants who use private vehicle fleets, Vivian continued. I've spoken informally with 3 of them in the past 2 weeks. The interest exists. What doesn't exist is a provider with the combination of technical competence and security awareness that the vehicles in this building's garage actually require, given that we now know with some specificity what it looks like when someone misuses that access. You want me to start a shop, Cole said. I want to invest in a shop that you start, Vivian said precisely. Not the same thing. You would own it. You would run it. I would provide the initial capital and the first-year anchor contract. The terms would be negotiated properly, with attorneys on both sides, which I am telling you now so you don't feel ambushed when I suggest it in person. Cole looked at the stove. The dinner needed attention. He turned the heat down without thinking about it. Why are you doing this? He asked. Because it's a sound investment and I have a financial incentive, she said. And then, after a beat, and because you won't accept anything that looks like charity, which means the only vehicle for doing something useful is making it make business sense, which it does, so I'm doing it. Cole stood in his kitchen for a moment. I need to think about it, he said. I know, Vivian said. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. What are you asking for tonight? A brief pause, shorter than her pauses usually were, which meant she'd thought about this already. Saturday, she said. There's a farmer's market on Larimer. My assistant tells me it's supposed to be reasonable weather. I need to buy olive oil because I've been out for 2 weeks and I keep ordering it online and then not being home when it delivers. Another pause. I thought if Maddie likes farmers markets. She does, Cole said. He said it before he'd made a conscious decision to say it. Then Saturday, Vivian said. Saturday, Cole said. He could hear something in her breathing that wasn't quite a sound, just a quality of air, a particular silence that carried weight without announcing itself. Good night, Cole. Good night, he said. He stood in the kitchen after the call ended and looked at nothing for a moment. Maddie appeared in the doorway with a crayon in one hand and the expression of someone who had heard enough of a conversation to know something was happening without knowing what. Was that the lady? She asked. Yes. Maddie considered this with the full serious machinery of her 8-year-old mind. The one on the news? The same one. Is she nice? Cole thought about that honestly. She's real, he said, which is better. Maddie processed this in the way she processed things that she was going to return to later. Are we having dinner? We are, Cole said, and turned back to the stove. They went to the farmer's market on Saturday morning. Cole and Maddie and Vivian, which was an arrangement that contained its own particular strangeness and moved through it into something more ordinary than Cole had expected. Vivian arrived in jeans and a coat, and without her car or her security detail, which she'd apparently negotiated with Preston by agreeing to a check-in protocol that satisfied him operationally without requiring a physical presence. She looked different without the professional architecture around her. Not diminished, just more actual, the way people look when they're wearing clothes that belong to their private life instead of their public one. Maddie shook her hand very formally when they met on the sidewalk outside the market, which was a thing Maddie did with adults she'd decided to take seriously. Vivian shook it back with equal formality without a trace of condescension, which Cole noticed and filed. They walked through the market and Vivian found her olive oil, 2 bottles from a small producer out of California who was at the market for the season, and she spent 15 minutes talking to the producer about the variety and the harvest timing in a way that surprised Cole until he remembered she'd grown up in a household where food was taken seriously, and some things from childhood never entirely leave you. Maddie attached herself to a stall selling honey and spent 10 minutes learning about bee populations from an older woman who wore a sweatshirt that said, "Bees understand," and who seemed completely delighted by Maddie's questions. Cole stood between the two of them, Vivian at the olive oil stall, Maddie at the honey stall, and watched them both and felt the strangeness of the moment, and then felt it resolve, the way things sometimes do when you stop waiting for them to make sense and just let them be the thing they are. They bought coffee from a truck near the market entrance and walked the last stretch slowly, and Maddie informed Vivian about the water cycle project with the same comprehensive energy she brought to all information she considered important, and Vivian listened with full attention and asked one question, about condensation specifically, why it happened on cold glasses in warm rooms, that sent Maddie into a 5-minute explanation that required both hands and a diagram drawn in the air. "She's remarkable," Vivian said quietly, when Maddie had run ahead to look at a display of handmade wooden toys. "I know," Cole said. "You know, but you say it the way someone says something they're still getting used to being allowed to feel." Cole looked at her sideways. "That's a specific read." "I notice things," she said, which was what she'd said on Tuesday night in the garage 4 weeks ago, which felt like considerably longer. They walked for a moment in silence that was comfortable in the way silence only gets when two people have stopped performing for each other. "The shop," Cole said. Vivian kept walking, didn't change her pace. "Yes?" "I'm going to say yes," Cole said. "Not tonight, because I told you I needed to think about it, and I meant that. But I'm telling you the direction so you can plan accordingly." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "What changed your mind?" "Nothing changed my mind," Cole said. "I thought about it the way you asked me to and arrived at yes, which is different." He paused. "The terms need to be structured so that I retain operational independence. Contracts, client relationships, hiring, all of that is mine. You're a capital investor with an anchor client agreement, not a partner." "I understand." "If you try to run the business," Cole said, "I'll hand you back the capital with interest and find another investor." "I wouldn't try to run it," Vivian said. "I have a company of my own that takes more management than I have hours for." "I know," Cole said. "I'm saying it anyway." "I know you are," she said. "Say it to the attorneys when we draft the terms. I'll agree." Cole looked at her. She was looking ahead, at Maddie, who had found a display of handmade kites and was inspecting them with the focused attention of someone doing genuine evaluation. "She wants the blue one," Cole said. "How do you know?" "She's been back to it 3 times, Cole said. "She'll talk herself out of it because she knows I didn't budget for it this week." Vivian reached into her coat pocket and produced her wallet before Cole could say anything, and he put his hand on her arm and she stopped. "No," he said. She looked at him. There was something in his expression she clearly read correctly because she put the wallet back. "She needs to know that some things you work toward," Cole said. Not harshly, just plainly, in the way he said most things. Vivian looked at Maddie at the kite display, then back at Cole. "What does she do then? When she wants something she doesn't have?" "She asks me how long," Cole said, "and we figure out together what it takes and how long that will be. And then she waits, and when she gets it, she knows what it cost and that she could do it, and that matters more than the thing itself." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Something moved through her expression that was complicated and not entirely comfortable. The look of someone encountering something that they recognize as true, but that also illuminates something about their own life by contrast. "I haven't done that in a long time," she said, "waiting to see if I can do it." "You just closed a merger in 11 days that your counterparty tried to derail through 3 separate channels," Cole said. "That's not the same thing." "No," Cole said. "That's harder. What I mean is you haven't let yourself want something small enough to have to wait for." She looked at him then, directly, fully, without the measured quality she usually kept in place. And Cole looked back, because he didn't look away from things, and because the thing in her expression that had been opening incrementally since Tuesday night in the garage had now opened completely, and what was underneath it was just a person, tired in the particular way of someone who has been competent for so long that they've forgotten what it feels like to not know the answer yet. "I'm rusty at that," she said. "That's all right," Cole said. "Rusty things fix." She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that needed more privacy than a farmer's market to complete itself. And she looked away, at the kites, at the market, at the October Denver morning that was cold and clear, with the mountains visible to the west in the specific sharp-edged way they got after a front move through. Maddie came back from the kite display with the deliberate composure of someone who had made a decision. "I'm going to ask Grandma Paulson if I can do extra reading hours for her," she announced. "She pays me 50 cents per hour. The blue kite is $6, so that's—" She counted in her head with visible effort. 12 hours. 12 hours, Cole confirmed. Maddie nodded with the satisfaction of a problem solved. Then she looked at Vivian. "Do you know how to fly a kite?" Vivian considered this seriously. "I flew one once, on a beach. I was not good at it." "Dad's good at it," Maddie said, as a piece of relevant information being contributed to the conversation. "He's patient about the string." Vivian looked at Cole with an expression that was fully the completed smile now, the one that opened her whole face. "Is that right?" "She's biased," Cole said. "She's accurate," Vivian said. They walked back through the market toward the street, and Maddie walked between them in the unselfconscious way of a child who has decided something without announcing it. And Cole let her because she was 8 and she was right. And some decisions are better made without commentary. Hargrove Automotive opened the following March. In a commercial space 3 blocks from the Blackwood Tower with a garage bay large enough for 4 vehicles and an office in the front, with a desk and a window and a second-hand couch that Maddie had selected because it was, in her assessment, the right shade of green. The first week was quiet. The second week was not. By the end of the first month, the anchor contract had generated 3 referrals from neighboring corporate tenants. And by the end of the third month, Cole had hired a part-time mechanic named Davis, who was 24 and good with his hands, and slightly in awe of his employer, in a way that Cole found mildly embarrassing and redirected by giving Davis progressively more technical work to focus on. Maddie did her homework behind the front desk most afternoons, because the elementary school 3 blocks away let out at 3, and Cole's day didn't end until 6, and Mrs. Paulson's knees had started giving her trouble, and Maddie had decided unilaterally that she preferred the garage to the apartment anyway. She had a spot at the desk with her own pencil cup and her own lamp and a small cactus that she'd named Gerald, and she treated the front desk with the serious proprietary energy of someone who considered herself a genuine operational contributor, which Cole mostly let her maintain because it wasn't entirely inaccurate. She greeted customers. She remembered their names and their vehicles and which ones had kids and which ones had dogs, and she relayed this information to Cole before appointments in the tone of a seasoned logistics coordinator. Davis found this both impressive and slightly intimidating, which was an appropriate response. Vivian came in on a Tuesday evening in late May, near closing time. Her car was, as Maddie immediately assessed with a raised eyebrow at Cole, perfectly fine. It had been in 2 weeks ago for routine maintenance, and there was nothing wrong with it that any reasonable professional evaluation could locate. Maddie looked at the car, then at Vivian, then at her father with the expression of someone who had been 8 years old long enough to understand something the adults were apparently still navigating. "The back left tire," Maddie told Vivian, with the gravity of someone offering professional cover. "Sometimes it reads a little low in cold weather. It's probably worth checking." Vivian looked at Maddie with the complete genuine smile. "I thought it might be." Cole looked at his daughter with the specific expression of a father who is trying not to show that he finds something very funny. "I'll take a look at it." He walked to the bay and Vivian followed, and Maddie stayed at the front desk with Gerald the cactus and her homework and the satisfied expression of a person who has managed a situation well. Cole checked the tire. The pressure was exactly correct, as Maddie had known it would be, as all 3 of them knew it would be. He replaced the cap and stood up and looked at Vivian, who was standing in the bay doorway with her arms crossed and her coat on, and the mountain evening light coming in orange through the open garage door behind her. "The tire's fine," Cole said. "I figured," Vivian said. "So why are you here?" She looked at him for a moment. She'd been coming around more frequently in the past 2 months, not constantly, not in a way that could be mapped into a clear pattern, but enough that it had its own rhythm, the kind of rhythm that forms without anyone scheduling it. She'd had dinner at his kitchen table twice. He'd had coffee at her office 3 times, once ostensibly about the anchor contract, and twice not at all. Maddie had started calling her Vivian instead of Ms. Blackwood, which had been Vivian's request and Maddie's immediate adoption. "I had a conversation today," Vivian said, "with my CFO about the single-parent flexibility program we're implementing for the company, the one I've been building since November." Cole waited. "It launches next month," Vivian said. "Flexible scheduling framework, emergency childcare fund, the whole structure. 260 employees across the company qualify." And he asked me where the idea came from, my CFO did, and I told him it came from an operational gap analysis I'd commissioned last year, which is technically not a lie because I did commission a gap analysis last year. "But that's not where it came from," Cole said. "No," Vivian said. "It came from a Tuesday in October when I was late for the most important meeting of my year and a mechanic in a parking garage told me to get down. And I understood, for the first time in a long time, that competence and visibility are not the same thing. That the most important person in a room is sometimes the one everyone's already decided doesn't matter." She paused. "It came from watching someone choose a life that looked smaller from the outside and was larger in every way that counted." The garage was quiet around them, the clean, organized quiet of a place where work happened and was done well. Tools hung on their correct hooks. The diagnostic equipment powered down for the evening. The faint smell of motor oil that Cole had stopped noticing entirely a long time ago. 260 people, Cole said. 260, Vivian said. And whatever their kids will eventually know about days when someone had the flexibility to actually be there. Cole looked at her across the garage bay. The evening light was shifting, going from orange to the softer blue of dusk, and somewhere at the front desk Maddie was doing math homework and providing Gerald the cactus with what sounded like a detailed explanation of long division. "I'm going to be honest with you about something," Cole said. "You're always honest with me," Vivian said. "It's occasionally inconvenient." "Rachel," Cole said. "I haven't talked about her with someone outside of Maddie in 4 years. Since Chicago, you don't have to." "I want to," Cole said. "That's what I'm telling you. It's been 4 years and I stopped wanting to talk about it because talking about it felt like reopening something that needed to stay closed. And in Chicago I talked about it, and it didn't feel like that. It felt like—" He stopped, looking for the right word and not reaching for a wrong one just to fill the space. It felt like saying out loud something that was true, and that deserved to be said. Vivian was very still. "That's the honest thing," Cole said. "I'm figuring out what that means." "So am I," Vivian said quietly. They stood in that for a moment, not filling it, not resolving it, just letting it be what it was, which was real and unfinished and worth being careful with. "Dinner," Cole said finally. "Maddie's doing homework, but she'll be done in 20 minutes, and she's already suggested twice this week that you might want to try the taco place on Federal." "I heard about this taco place," Vivian said. "She's been trying to get someone to go with her for 6 months." "She mentioned," Vivian said, and now the smile was fully there, completely there, the one that opened her whole face, and that Cole had stopped trying not to notice because noticing it was honest, and he decided to be honest about the things that were true. Maddie appeared in the doorway between the front office and the garage bay with her backpack over one shoulder and Gerald the cactus under one arm, which she apparently felt needed to accompany them. "The tire was fine," Maddie said, looking at Vivian. "I know," Vivian said. "We're still going to the taco place, though," Maddie said. "We are," Vivian confirmed. Maddie looked satisfied with this resolution in the way she looked satisfied when systems worked correctly, and she turned and went to get her coat. And Cole looked at Vivian, and Vivian looked at Cole, and neither of them said anything, which was its own kind of answer. Cole turned off the garage lights. He locked the bay door. He stood for a moment in front of the new sign outside. Hargrove Automotive, clean and simple, black letters on a white background, the kind of sign that says what it is without embellishment, and felt the accumulated weight of the past 7 months settle into something that had the quality of a foundation rather than a burden. There was a version of his life that looked, from certain angles, like a series of losses. The career he'd left, the wife he'd buried, the years of working in a building full of people who looked through him. Those things were true. He didn't revise them or soften them because they'd cost real money, and he'd paid it with real parts of himself, and pretending otherwise would have been a kind of dishonesty he'd never been able to manage. But here was also true. A daughter who made sandwiches for neighbors and named cacti and could explain condensation with both hands, and was going to be, Cole understood with a certainty that needed no evidence, exactly the kind of person the world needed more of. A shop with his name on it and his work inside it. A man named Davis who was getting better every week. 260 employees at a company he'd never worked for who would go home earlier to their children because of a Tuesday in October when he'd been doing brake work on a BMW in a parking garage. And Vivian, who was waiting on the sidewalk with Maddie and Gerald the cactus, laughing at something Maddie had said, the kind of laugh that came from actually finding something funny rather than performing amusement, the laugh Cole had heard for the first time at the farmer's market, and that had settled somewhere in him in a way that he'd stopped trying to dislodge. He hadn't rescued her. That was not the story. She'd been managing her own problems at considerable competence for 30 years before he appeared, and she would have found another way through the week in October, or maybe she wouldn't have, but that wasn't the point. The point was that two people who had each built very careful walls around the parts of themselves that had been damaged had found, in the particular chaos of a bad week, that the walls were not as necessary as they'd seemed. He locked the garage and walked out into the evening. Maddie took his hand immediately, which she still did at 8, in the same way she'd done since she could reach it, and he held on, because she wouldn't always, and he knew it, and knowing it was part of what made it exactly enough. Vivian walked on his other side, and they walked toward Federal Avenue and the taco place Maddie had been campaigning for. And the Denver evening was cold and clear, with the mountains holding the last of the light in the west. And Cole Hargrove walked through it with his daughter's hand in his, and something unclenching in his chest that had been holding itself tight for a long time. He'd thought, for 4 years, that walking away from the life he'd had meant living smaller. That love was the thing you traded for safety, that depth was the thing you surrendered for presence, that the choice between extraordinary and ordinary was a permanent one made once and then lived inside forever. He'd been wrong about that. Not catastrophically. He'd made the right choice, the one that needed making, the one he'd make again in the same circumstances. But the premise underneath it had been wrong. Ordinary life was not the consolation. It was the actual thing. And the mechanic that everyone had laughed at for fixing broken cars had built, quietly and without requiring anyone's permission, the specific life he'd actually wanted, the one that had been waiting on the other side of all the noise for him to get there. He got there.